Hi, Knock. Unmute.
Apologies, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day one of Elap Bootcamp, Building Laboratory Muscle. We're thrilled to have you tuning in virtually. Thank you for making time to be a part of this event. My name is Nok Lu, and I am part of the Program Development, Research, and Enforcement Unit in the California Environmental Laboratory Accreditations Program. And I'll be your MC today. Today's theme is all about reporting for duty at this year's ELAP Lab Bootcamp. We are stepping up to the core responsibilities that every environmental testing laboratory needs to meet with precision, integrity, and efficiency. Just like a boot camp, we're preparing to face the challenges ahead, ready to build the strength and resilience necessary for success. Strong labs aren't built overnight. They're developed through training, discipline, and a commitment to excellence. In this boot camp, we're ready to tackle everything from the complexities of administration to the demands of technical precision. Consider it your strength training for mastering the essentials. From compliance knowledge to developing strong, reliable habits. By reporting for duty today, we're not just learning, we're forming a united community ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead and building the muscle we need to keep pushing forward. Together, we'll rise to the occasion and elevate our labs to new heights. You'll hear from regulatory experts, assessors, and lab professionals, all of whom bring real-world experience and practical guidance that you can take back and apply directly in your lab. And don't worry, it's not all heavy lifting. We've built in brief accreditation officer moments with our very own Jennifer McLaren to give you quick insights from the accreditation officer and a moment to breathe. Over 400 people registered to join us this year, and many have indicated that this is their first time joining us for an ELAP conference. So it's time for a little bit of quick housekeeping. We're using Teams Live to accommodate the large number of attendees, and as an attendee, you can't unmute yourself or turn your camera on. Any questions you wish to pose to our presenters can be done through the Q&A chat box. We encourage you to put your name in the space provided. On your screen, you should see how to submit your questions via chat. During today's event, feel free to send in your questions throughout the morning at any time. We will pose questions to the presenters at the conclusion of their presentation. We also have a space for continued conversations on our ELAP Conference 2025 forum. Join the 2025 ELAP Conference conversation by following the forum link in your registration email or head to the 2025 ELAP Conference page on free forums. Ask questions and network at the 2025 ELAP Conference forum site. So as we get ready to dive into a full day of learning, I encourage you to take notes, ask questions, connect with fellow attendees, and most importantly, enjoy the conference. Let's begin with someone who knows a thing or two about discipline and precision. It's time for our keynote.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Let me introduce you, Sergeant Tibbetts. Our keynote speaker this morning brings a unique perspective on structure, accountability, and performance under pressure, all traits that transfer incredibly well to the lab environment. Please join me in welcoming Senior Master Sergeant Tibbetts, who has dedicated over 20 years of his career to public service, operational excellence, and instilling a culture of discipline and pride in every team he leads. Senior Master Sergeant Tibbetts is the Operations Superintendent at the 97th Intelligence Squadron, Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. He is responsible for the operations, readiness, training, tradecraft, and professional development of 490 airborne cryptologic language analysts and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance operators performing aircrew duties aboard 3 RC-135 variants. One of the core values in both the military and the laboratory community is continual improvement, which is the commitment to doing better and never settling for good enough. That principle is at the heart of Senior Master Sergeant Tibbetts' work, and the focus of today's keynote address. You're in for a powerful and motivating message. Please welcome Senior Master Sergeant Tibbetts to the stage.
All right. Hey, thank you so much, Nock. Good morning to everyone. Am I audible at this point? I think I got good comms. I'm seeing a slide. I think I'm supposed to have black slide with white text for an opener, which is fine. As we go back, I think there should be an Arthur C. Clarke quote that's sitting on the backdrop. But if not, that's fine. As introduced, my name is Senior Master Sergeant David Tibbetts. Most recently, I just changed jobs this last month. I'm now the Senior Enlisted Leader at the 55th Intelligence Support Squadron, still here at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. And I am incredibly humbled to be joining you today to speak to you about organizational culture. So the two things that I want to kick off with to help you understand me is first, my academic background. Not because I think it's particularly germane, but because I think it's written like a Michael Bay movie. So I got my associate's degree from the Community College of the Air Force in Intelligence Studies, and also from the Defense Language Institute in the language of Korean. I'm a Korean cryptologic analyst by trade. As I grew up, I went to American Military University, where I got my degree in management and leadership, and then I attended National Intelligence University to get my master's in strategic intelligence with a focus on IC management and leadership. All that to say, I am not an organizational psychologist, and I think I'll preface that now, and you'll understand as we go forward why I'd like to say that. What I am, first and foremost, is a philosopher, I'm a tinkerer, and I'm a storyteller. So I've really embraced the identity of philosopher, and I want to be clear here. As much as I do enjoy reading the classics, I don't mean a philosopher in the sense that I sit and I read philosophy, but I think that's more like saying that you're a runner and that you read Usain Bolt. Instead, I think of being a philosopher as being one who actively engages in the practice. And so when I go into an academic setting, I'm really there to try to suss out the underlying concepts and truths that undergird systems and why they behave. Secondly, I'm a tinkerer, and I say that because it lets me get away with a lot more when it comes to how I mess with systems. I have the Roomba methodology when I go about process improvement, which means that I bump into a lot of walls and learn a lot along the way. And so I really enjoy adjusting factors about systems to be able to learn how they operate and how I can improve them. And last but not least, I'm a storyteller because I've found that storytelling is the fundamental way that humans make connections, and it's how we form meaning when it comes to relationships with ideas and knowledge, and how we can actually get them to move from our head into our hearts, and we can hold them as we go forward. So at the opening of my presentation, and I don't know if it's going to show up as a quote from Arthur C. Clarke, and some of you may be familiar with it, but it's that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And the reason that I open with this is I feel that when we talk about culture, a lot of us talk about it like it's something mystical and something other and something that we don't have direct control over. And I can completely understand why, because culture does not seem to operate on a scale that we can touch tangibly. It seems like it's something that's happening to us. But what I want you to realize is human cultures now have been evolving and adapting for thousands of years. And I want you to think about the AI and machine learning models that we're training today and how many decades we've had to train those models and where they're at. So if you look at the human ecosystem, at the cultural webs that we weave, I want you to instead think about them as models that have now been training for 5,000 plus years. And that's why I think we tend to have this magical idea about culture, because in reality, it's machine learning that's been done on a timescale that is utterly incomprehensible to humans on a day-to-day basis. So to begin talking about culture as a process, the first thing that we're going to do on the next slide is we're going to go about setting up some standard definitions. I don't necessarily use the same definitions that everybody else does, so I think it's incredibly important that we establish a common lexicon that we can all operate off of. So first and foremost, we're going to ask that question: what is culture? How do we want to be able to define it going forward? Next, we're going to go into complex systems using ants to understand self-organization, complex adaptive systems being my particular field of study. Then we're going to talk about signal and noise, understanding superstitious pigeons and how they come to be and how they give us an insight into how human beings act. Next, we're going to learn about feedback through Robbie the robot. And then we're going to talk about emergence in the context of carpenter bees. Lastly, we'll talk about cellular automata, which gives us a model to understand how cultures emerge and how we can more deliberately process them and improve them in our own worlds as opposed to being at the mercy of them. So next, what is culture? So there's this really interesting quote that I've come across, which is attributed to Peter Drucker, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I'm sure that a lot of you have encountered that in your own worlds. And yet we will open a meeting saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast and then immediately start talking about our strategy. And why is it that we do this? What is this pitfall where we acknowledge the fact that culture is more important than our strategies and it will undermine them at every turn, and yet we never actually sit down and talk about how to improve our cultures? And I think that's because culture hides behind that same mystic veil as the word innovation. And so the goal by the end of today is that we will establish a common definition that allows you to interact with culture and change it on purpose. So first, we set up our definition. In my research, what I have found is culture is the systematic reward, indifference, and punishment of behaviors within an organization. And that is it. There is nothing more that makes up the culture. And so I want you to think back about the culture of the organization that you're in. Some of you may be in organizations that have cultures of excellence, cultures of punctuality. And what does that really mean? When you walk into a meeting, does it start without you if you're not on time? Are people milling about and starting 5 minutes late is kind of par for the course and everybody's still getting coffee? Are you locked out of the room if you don't show up by exactly 1100? That really defines a culture of punctuality in an organization. Does the timeliness of your reports actually factor into how well your supervisor appreciates the work that you do? Are they willing to let you be a little bit late for a higher quality product? Or do you absolutely need to have it in by the deadline? Those sorts of punishments are the sort of things that tell us what's important within our organization. Similarly, what's rewarded? So when you show up and you're polite or kind within your organization, does it matter? Are those the sorts of people that get elevated into leadership positions, that get bonuses, that get company awards written for them? Or is that sort of behavior simply ignored? So when we talk about these three categories within feedback systems, I want to talk about reward, which is positive feedback, and then punishment, which is negative feedback. But then there's this third insidious category that I've added in the last two presentations, which is indifference. So it's important for us to realize that our cultures exist as microcosms within larger cultures. Every person who's showing up to the office day in, day out that works at your organization belongs to several other cultures in their own home, in their own families, in their own communities. If you don't espouse a cultural value, I guarantee you that their own cultural values will take the place. And so if you tolerate anything like discrimination or harsh words within your workplace, and you don't say anything about that sort of thing, even if you're not rewarding it, you will find that those individual cultures are going to influence how people behave within the office. So moving on to our next slide, we are going to talk about complex adaptive systems. So complex systems are interesting organizations, and I use ant colonies to help people understand them, because bar none, everybody has had the wonderful pleasure of walking into their kitchen and seeing this sight, which is a line of ants that has miraculously formed across the floor or across their counter as they go in search of food. And this is a really interesting thing when you think about it, because the last time that I checked, ants have not developed any types of long-range communications technology. They do not have bureaucracies or organizational structures. They don't have bosses. Even the idea that they have a queen is a misnomer. It's just a role within the hive. And yet somehow we get this phenomenon where ants line up and are able to find food and then bring it back to their colony, even if it's in your cupboards. So how does this actually happen? What's happening is every single ant, when they discover food, will bring it back to the colony. And as they do, they will lay down a chemical signature. And chemicals are how ants all communicate. And with their antennae, they were able to sense it. And so when that ant goes, they will lay down a trail as they go back. Now, if you could click the slide one more. And the thing that we don't realize is every single ant actually has sort of a hidden number that's assigned to them that tells them how sensitive they are to that chemical signature. Now, ants with a low threshold, when they sense the first indication that there's a chemical signature, they follow it and they go where it's going. And when they get to the end, if they find food, they repeat the exact same process that their fellow colony mate did, which is they will leave a trail heading back to the colony. What that does is it actually increases the density of that chemical signature, which means that ants with a higher tolerance are more likely to follow them. Now, as time goes on, eventually that food supply gets worn out. And if an ant gets to the end of the trail and doesn't find anything, they head back to their colony, but they don't leave a signature. And through the natural process of evaporation, that signature weakens over time. So why are we talking about ants? At the end of the day, they are creating a self-reinforcing system that causes large groups of members of the colony to adopt a single behavior, which is to follow trails to food to bring it back to the colony and to begin not following those signatures when there's no resources to be had. So this self-organizational principle, however much more complex in human society, is operating as well. When we see people that are being rewarded, we are naturally inclined to mimic those behaviors. And when we see people that are being punished, we are naturally inclined to avoid those behaviors. And so when we understand how ant colonies self-organize, we can understand how our businesses and our organizations and our companies, through the policies that they have in place, are able to generate emergent behaviors in their employees as they follow the wisdom of the crowd. Okay, so now we understand how complex systems work. But how are these signals happening? And to understand this, I think it's great to talk about pigeons. Namely, I want to talk about B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner was a researcher during the World Wars who had a really interesting idea, which was to create pigeon-guided munitions. And I mean exactly what I said. He was putting pigeons inside of bombs to be able to guide them. And the weird thing is that it actually worked. So Skinner created these pigeon-guided munitions, and because he was doing that, he was being given a lot of federal dollars. And what does anybody do with a federal grant and low supervision is do a bunch of experiments that are probably outside the scope of their original work. And so Skinner was a behavioral psychologist and was working with animals, and he was really interested in how animals behaved in response to rewards. So the way a pigeon-guided munition worked is a pigeon would be strapped inside the front of the bomb, and it would be able to see the bomb sight in front of it, and it was supposed to peck in the direction to be able to stay on the target. So what they were doing is they were showing pigeons basically pictures of tanks, and they were putting them on a button that when they tapped it, they would get food pellets. And so they would train the pigeon to be able to keep on target because it was trying to get food. So this type of device was called a Skinner box. It's what he used to train them. And while he was training them to be able to do this operation, he also tested a number of other theories about animal behavior. So normally the system worked exactly like I described. Pigeon taps button, pigeon gets food pellet, pigeon rejoices. And so what Skinner was interested in was what happened when things about the experiment's parameters changed. And so he tried a lot of things, but the most interesting one that he found was he made it so that the process was entirely random. So when the pigeon tapped the button, it didn't necessarily get a food pellet. And sometimes even when it wasn't tapping the button, food pellets came out. All right. So you begin to wonder what would happen in this situation. And the answer is that the pigeons became intensely superstitious. So certain pigeons began doing rain dances. They would do 3 circular turns and then tap the button. Some would walk to the back and the front of the cage and tap the button. Some would bob their head 7 times and tap the button. And the fact was that due to an anchoring bias, the pigeons were trying to do whatever it was that they did the last time that they got a food pellet, even though it had nothing to do with the results of the experiment. So when we go to the next page, you'll see that we're talking about signal and noise. So when we think about signal, that's usually what we imagine, right? We imagine that there's this nice clear spike, and then there's this low floor, and we know that there's static, but ultimately we can hear the message clear as day because it's really tall and really clear. But in actuality, what we're usually dealing with looks like this. And so I want you to take a moment and look at this graph and ask yourself, which one is the signal? And how would you know? So this is a trick question because it's all signal. There's actually no such thing as noise. So here's the definition that I have developed for the question, what is signal? A consistent observation in the environment. Now, why is this important? See, normally we think of signals as having a transmitter, somebody who's delivering a message, somebody who's doing something intentional, and then we have a receiver. And that is how we talk about signal in our day-to-day lives. But the fact is that your brain is always looking for signals. It's always looking for patterns, and it will find them even when there is an unintended transmitter, and it will find them even when it is not intended to be the recipient. And so when you look at a lot of the superstitious behaviors that exist in human society, or even people getting a misread when something like a wink is sent to them across a bar that was not intended for them, the fact is that humans will pick up signals in the environment and they will make interpretations about them as long as those observations are consistent. When it comes to your organization, this means what behaviors are consistently being seen within your organization's culture that are telling people how they're supposed to behave. So, next slide. And to understand how that plays out in actuality, we're going to talk about Robbie the robot. Now, Robbie the robot was trained as a trash cleaning algorithm, not too dissimilar to a Roomba. There was a museum that was having a problem with its janitorial staff, and they asked the question, could we train a robot to be able to do this task, to go across the floors, find trash, and pick it up for us? And it's a pretty simple task at the outset. And so they took an approach that's probably different than the type of programming that you've heard of in your backgrounds, which is they use something called a genetic algorithm. Now, genetic algorithms are really interesting because nobody is deliberately programming the robot. What they do instead, if you go to your next slide, sorry, we can go one more. Okay. Here you can see a map of how Robbie the robot's being trained. That's a grid, I believe it's 10 by 10. On it, an arbitrary 30 pieces of trash, virtual trash, are going to be dropped. And the job is for Robbie to be able to successfully go and collect them. So the gray dots are all pieces that he was able to find within a given number of turns. I think it's 50. And then the orange ones are the ones that he missed. So what happens is at the beginning of this experiment, they create 1,000 different versions of Robbies. And they all have completely randomized behaviors. They can see ahead of them, behind them, to their left and to their right. And they're allowed to move forward, backward, left, right, or they can pick up trash. Those are the actions they're allowed to perform. And what they do is they can make a randomizer that says, if there's a piece of trash to your left and a piece of trash to your right, take this action. And they make 1,000 versions of Robbies with completely random versions of these instructions. And then they send them out into the virtual field. Robbie gets penalized if he tries to pick up trash that isn't there, or if he bumps into a wall. And Robbie gets rewarded when he successfully picks up trash. So when you go to this next slide, you'll see the slide we were just talking about. This is when Robbie was well trained. And you can see at the beginning, Robbie did very poorly. You'll see that there was a -61 for his initial score. Robbie bumped into a lot of walls and Robbie tried to pick up a whole lot of nothing. Okay. Now, at the end of this run, what they would do is they would pick the most successful version and they would make 1,000 versions of that one. And they would combine them with the other top 9 successful versions and see which ones did well. And then they would run the experiment again. And they would do that over and over and over. And each time you would be selecting for, from a genetic standpoint, the superior program. And you can see Robbie actually got incredibly good at picking up trash for a robot that was never programmed by anybody. So like I said before, I'm a tinkerer. I am not a coder, but I know enough to be dangerous. And so while I can't write NetLogo, I can edit NetLogo. And so I decided to see what would happen if I made it so Robbie did not get clear feedback. So I made it so it was completely random if Robbie actually got negative or positive feedback from his supervisor, which was this algorithm. And you can see Robbie got pretty bad at picking up trash pretty quickly because he didn't get negative feedback. And he only got told he was doing a good job some of the time. Now, the thing about this graph that I think is insidious, that's saddest to me, is if you look at the bottom, Robbie's lowest negative score was -0.66. So the worst part is Robbie didn't even know he was doing a bad job. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that incredibly relatable as a member of organizations where I've often wondered if the work I was doing was valuable for the organization because I have been in a feedback void. So if we go to the next slide, what is feedback? What's the definition that we're actually using here? So again, we're going to come up with a novel definition of feedback that helps us understand how our organizations are operating. Feedback is positive and negative signals from the environment, seemingly in response to an action or way of being. Okay. And if we go back to our example with the pigeons, we'll remember they were doing behaviors they thought were helping, and they were getting a response. Occasionally, they would be given a food pellet. And their only way of interacting with that information was to assume that it was because of whatever they just did. So in your organizations, you have to remember that if somebody is late and you verbally say, we are completely accepting of dynamic time schedules. We understand you have kids and families and life gets in the way sometimes. You can say that out loud all you want. But if the door is locked when they show up to come in the meeting, that's the feedback signal that they're going to get. So remember that overt words and stated policies are nothing compared to the actual feedback that your organization's member receive on a day-to-day basis. So next slide. All of these are talking about something that in the complex adaptive system realm, we call emergent properties. So I think the easiest way to understand this is to talk about bees, specifically carpenter bees. Carpenter bees are nature's lovable dolt. I lived in California and I know that I had them in my yard, and they are some of the most delightfully dumb animals that I've ever seen in my life. They love to ram against your shed and your walls. They are loud, they're obnoxious, they're not terribly clever. And if you happen to have playhouses or anything built out of wood, they will bore holes in it for giggles. So when you see these animals, the weird thing about them is they are solitary. So if we go to our next slide, you'll see the first picture. Carpenter bees aren't like the bees you're used to thinking of that have a hive. What a carpenter bee does is it finds a piece of wood and it bores a hole in it. And then it will go and it will collect pollen and it will fill that hole with pollen and it will lay an egg in there and then it will cover it up. And it will go and it will do this for a number of holes. But they are solitary insects. They're not hive dwellers. And I think when we think about bees, we usually imagine that they have just always been in hives. That's the nature of the bees, right? But something really weird is going on here because some scientists, again, with too much money and federal grants, decided to do another experiment where they took two carpenter bees and they locked them together. Carpenter bees who are solitary creatures who want nothing to do with one another, they forced them to co-occupy the same space. And what happened is one carpenter bee drilled all the holes and the other got all the food. And they naturally started displaying hive-based behaviors without any prompting and without being hive-based organisms. So what it turns out is the bees very quickly realized that one of them was a stronger burrower. They were able to drill more efficiently. Whoever was the stronger burrower in these situations would become the dominant burrower, and the other would become the forager. And it's somehow baked into their genetic algorithms to adopt these behaviors when they're forced into close proximity. And so now we can start to reimagine the evolution of the bee and how these organizations came to be, not because they are inherently colony-based, because they were solitary animals that had emergent behaviors hidden in their genetic code that naturally came to be. And there were certain strategic advantages that manifested when they began working together. So, to the next slide, what are emergent properties? These are qualities and behaviors that are manifest as a result of the interaction between simple mechanics and specific conditions. So the last topic we're going to talk about so you understand what's happening in organizations is cellular automata. These are very fascinating little rules and they're all math. So you'll probably see a dancing graphic that's next to you and it looks a little bit like a crossword that won't slow down. And what's happening here is every single cell has a set of rules and it reads its adjacent cells, a lot like Robbie the robot was. And so it just says, is the cell above me black or white? Is the cell next to me black or white? And it has a set of rules baked in that it will change based on what the cells next to it look like. It's simple enough. And so you can see how this causes every frame the evolution of a pattern that starts to look a lot more lifelike, that has these weird behaviors that look almost living, but in reality are just lights turning on and off. So at our next slide, we're going to talk about reducing dimensions. See, information storage is really expensive, okay? And so while we can talk about the fact that there are very complex rules in our organizations that dictate how we behave, they get simplified over time because it's too expensive to remember everything. So for instance, If you get up in the morning and your alarm went off, but you snoozed it too many times, so you're actually running 5 minutes late, but you're 10 minutes late because your kid was making you make breakfast and you got the wrong cereal the first time, and you got to work and then your boss was upset with you because you were 10 minutes late, your brain is probably not going to remember all the details about that situation. It's going to simplify it to something like being late is bad, all right? Or at least being late for work as bad. Now, if you couple that with another instance where you turn in a report and your report is late and you get chastised for the report being late, you will start to simplify that into a rule that our organization is timely. And that's because your brain can now generalize that lateness is unacceptable across the board. And it's much easier for it to remember that lateness as a rule is culturally unacceptable than it is to remember all the specific circumstances under which lateness is unacceptable. As you can see, these simple rules are fascinating. So in the animated graphic that's going on there, there's rules about these hex tiles, and they're supposed to be water, sand, and grass, and they adopt a different state based on the state of what's next to them. And you can see that they very quickly turn into islands and peninsulas and forests. And that is all because of simple rules of adjacency. Your organization's members are doing the same exact calculus by watching their neighbors and seeing what happens to them when they do certain things. Now, they attached graphics to their presentation instead of just a text-based report. Was it rewarded? Was it not rewarded? They stay late every night. Are they getting promoted? Those are the sort of things that they're absorbing as they go forward. So now, I want to take you quickly through, because I know we're running against time and I appreciate your patience here. We're going to go to the application phase. So we're going to talk about forming a lexicon so your people can talk about process improvement. We're going to talk about tipping points and structuring chants. We're going to talk about securing buy-in. What's the deal that you can offer to your people? How we can implement that model. And then lastly, we're going to talk about innovation and how that process happens. So the lexicon. Curiosity cannot be born from ignorance. Now, what we're doing is we're taking all the principles we've learned about how culture operates at the base level, at that human code, and we're looking on how to use the process improvement strategies and an innovation culture to deliberately develop our organization into one that is more likely to innovate. Now, if your people do not have a baseline language to be able to discuss innovation and process improvement, then they are not equipped to begin having the conversation at all. We have to have just enough to make us hungry for something before we can really get engaged with the material. Next, tipping points. When we talk about tipping points, a lot of the time we think we have to get the buy-in of everybody. And so we have mass emails that go out organization-wide to try to get everybody's buy-in. But it's not actually about that, right? And it's also not about whoever's at the top that thinks they're in charge. In reality, it's about a dedicated cadre of champions that become the implementers of a vision. And so while the visionary at the top is essential to set the course, it's those people that will ultimately seize it and make it their cause. It's those people that opt to become followers. They are the ones that make a leader into a leader. And so when you are trying to get a new culture to take root in your organization, you should not expend needless energy on the masses who are going to try to give you resistance, but you need to find that group of champions who's going to advance your cause out of belief. Next is about securing buy-in. Now, this is a much cleaner way of what I usually say this, but people don't fear change, they just fear bad change. All right. And that's because they've experienced bad changes throughout their career. And the status quo is safe because they know how it operates. So when you're trying to sell people on change, a lot of times we try to beat people over the head with it. And that's really not what it's about. It's all about marketing. So when we talk about failures of innovation, people have good ideas all the time. Why do they always get squelched? It's because nobody takes the time to really invest in the advertisement and getting people engaged. Lastly, when we have innovation and when we have these process improvement cultures, we can't keep taking moonshots over and over and over without paying the bills. The future is great, but you can't rely on infinite credit from it. You have to pay some dividends today to get your organization to keep investing in the future. And I know I'm talking to a bunch of laboratory scientists, and so there's a lot of people here that understand this principle and methodology, but just understanding that, yes, you're going to take some risk and you're take some moonshots, but you have to find a way to express the value of what you're doing to get your organization to keep invested in it. So next, I'm going to bring us back to the ant colony briefly, because what I want to do is I want you to think about the ants you've seen in your house. We've all seen the line of ants, but we've also seen that lone ant sitting on your bathroom counter wondering, why in the world are you here, buddy? Nobody else is around. And the fact is that in the colony, this role is called a scout ant. And what scout ants do is they do not play the numbers game. They wander around aimlessly. They do not follow other people's trails. But when they encounter food, they will lay down the first trail. They are essential to colony survival. They make up about 5% of the population, and most of them die. But the fact is, the ones who survive are the ones that discover new food sources. They are the balancing act for the exploration-exploitation dichotomy that exists within ants. Now, what I want you to think about in this context is innovation will not look like work. So if you have somebody sitting in a chair staring up at the ceiling and you walked into their office and said, "What are you doing?" and they responded, "Thinking," is that okay? Do we accept that in our organizations, that we value thinking and contemplation as a form of work? Or do we need people hands on keyboard running down experiments? Have we really created the room and the space to encourage that type of behavior? So how do we make that space? For this, I offer you the bargain. There's 3 parties that are involved in innovation, all right? The organization, they're paying the bills. You need to give them back what you're getting. And so first and foremost, whenever you save man hours, whenever you make something more efficient, you need to give them back half that time. But then you have to understand that innovation and the individual are both parts of that process as well. How do I incentivize those? And I do that by taking the remaining half and splitting it again. And that means if I saved an hour, yes, 30 minutes of that's going to go back into production. But 15 minutes I am going to give to you to sit back and think and really ask yourself big questions about how we can do things better. And then 15 minutes of that, I want you to invest in yourself. Go learn something that we cannot predict, that can give us emergent results that we cannot anticipate. Reinvest in the individual and provide them the incentive to innovate, not just because it benefits the organization, but because they have skin in the game as well. So lastly, I want to talk about how innovation is ultimately a step process. It's iterative, not something that's a direct linear process. And ultimately, imagination is limited by its reference point. But instead of doing this theoretically, I'm going to show you how this plays out in actuality. So if we go to our next slide, I want to show you the original shovel. So with our first click, here it is. It's your hands. That was the first shovel that mankind ever invented. It's very simple. It is a scoop. And when you go forward, somebody looked at that scoop and said, man, if this was a rock, it would work so much better. And then somebody else said, well, what if you put a stick on the end for leverage, right? And now we have a shovel. But now really a spoon is just a tiny food shovel. And a spade is if I shrink the dimensions of the handle, now I have a greater amount of leverage. And what if I turn the head of a shovel on its side and now I have an axe? What nobody did was look at a shovel and imagine an excavator, right? That is a leap too far, unless you know what a truck is, because then it's just shovel truck. All right, that is not hard to get to. And so why am I telling all you this? It's because when we bring in diverse elements with wildly different experiences, they build lighthouses in the expanse of human imagination across these fields of discovery. And when we intersect the beams between somebody who knows what a shovel is and somebody who knows what a truck is, you can get to an excavator. Okay, next slide. So what are we doing moving forward? Ultimately, you need to build the lexicon in your organization to enable the discussion. You need to create a nerve center to channel feedback up and down within an organization and do the marketing for why the ideas are good. You need to empower and diversify your agents so that they can connect with one another and expand the things they knew and build those lighthouses in the dark. You need to reward the organization, but also the process and the person. And at the end of the day, you create the systems that recognize work, reward desired behaviors, and remove the pain points that cause people to avoid them. Next slide. So, what is culture? What have we concluded on here? Culture is simply the systematic reward and punishment and indifference of behaviors in an organization. It is not magic. It's defined by the feedback systems, be they punitive or reward, that we impose to make it happen. And at the end of the day, if you don't make your organization's culture, it will make itself. All right. So the last thing I'm going to borrow from you is just 1 minute of your time. And I want you to close your eyes and I want you to sit in silence. I'll start the clock now. Don't think about anything. All right, that was 1 minute. And now you know that 1 minute is a very long amount of time. All right. So now, obviously, there's not a show of hands here, but how many people were successful at thinking about nothing? Right? No, probably not. Right? You were thinking about your to-do list. You were thinking about this is really weird. Why is it so quiet? What's that insane beeping I keep hearing in the background? Did I actually turn the stove off this morning? Right? So you're thinking about all the things that are going on in your life. But here's the weird thing I want to ask you. I told you not to think, right? You agreed you weren't going to think. So who was thinking? Because you told me you weren't going to think. And I assumed that you weren't thinking. So you said that these thoughts were happening, which means that you weren't thinking those thoughts, right? So what I want you to understand is you just experienced what it's like to be your organization. All the thoughts that are happening in your head, they don't belong to the part of you that you think thinks. They are all of the coworkers who are flowing in and out of the executive's office, who have all these good ideas, who have projects that need prioritization, that have scheduling requirements, resource requirements, manpower requirements. They are the people that are going. And I think this is really good for any of the executives in the room, because what I need you to realize is you are not in charge of your organizations. All right? Your organizations are in charge of your organizations. And it's by developing these cultures deliberately that you can shape that silence, that you can control what thoughts happen when you don't think about anything on purpose. And when you don't give them direction, how will your people behave? Thank you so much for your time. I know I'm probably about 10 minutes over. I tried to keep it as tight as I could. At this time, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. Or if we need to flow to the next presentation, I completely understand.
Thank you, Senior Master Sergeant Tibbetts, for that inspiring start. Just want to note, we are having some technical issues with the network, and we are aware of the dinging sounds. It appears to be a Microsoft issue, and we're currently working on a solution to these issues. So we do apologize and appreciate your commitment to being here. And also a reminder, this conference is also being recorded and will be uploaded to our Elap YouTube page. Now, let's just shift over to, we'll shift from mindset to management. Accreditation is the backbone of laboratory credibility, and within every accredited laboratory is organized, highly effective administration that makes accreditation possible and sustainable. We're joined by Caitlin McCarty, along with key members of the ELAP administration team, Ruby Lau and Kim Anderson, to focus on the role of administration as a driver for laboratory success. Caitlin is the supervisor of Elap's Administrative Operations Unit, overseeing the administrative team and day-to-day operations of the application and accreditation processes. She joined Elap in 2015 and has participated in many milestone program moments since then. Ruby is a staff service analyst in the Administrative Operations Unit. She joined Elap in 2014 and has been working for the state of California for over 25 years. Kim is a member of the Administrative Operations Unit and assists with daily operations of the application and accreditation processes and leads Elap's customer service arm. Together, they will explore Elap's administrative landscape and share tips for staying organized and stress-free. With a deep understanding of the operational demands of laboratory programs, they'll discuss how administrative strategy, planning, and support lay the foundation for consistent quality and continual improvement. Please join me in welcoming Caitlin, Ruby, and Kim to the stage.
Good morning. Thank you, Nock. I appreciate that introduction. And a special thanks to Sergeant Tibbetts. I thought that keynote was amazing. I'm a student of public administration, and organizational culture is something that I'm incredibly fascinated with. And I don't think we get enough time to think about it amidst the our normal day-to-day business and work. Thank you for all of that insight. I'm Kate McCarthy. As Nock said, I oversee the administrative team here, and I am so excited to be here for our 5th annual Elap Con. I cannot believe that we've been doing this for 5 years now. It is truly one of my favorite things that we do here because we get to join you in a different setting. We get to have fun. I love a theme, and we get to work towards our common goals in improving this program and all of our laboratories in our state. This is also a very special ELAPCon for me because I get to introduce you to 2 members of my team that you all interact with, probably more than anyone else, but this is publicly the first time that they will be presenting. So rather than listen to me talk for the next 20 minutes, you will get to listen to Kim Anderson and Ruby Lau, who lead all of the ELAP administrative operations around our applications and customer service. So with that, I think that we can move to the next slide so that you can see all of our beautiful faces from the ELAP administrative operations team. And then beyond that, I think I will hand it over to Kim Anderson to get us going.
Thank you, Kate. Good morning, everyone. And like Kate said, thank you for being a part of ELAPCon 2025. And again, a special thanks to Sergeant David Tibbetts for a great introspective presentation. Next slide, please. This presentation will cover the key components of the administrative application process shown here. I will talk about the importance of administrative review, avoiding hazards, and a lab's toolbox that they can use in this process. All of this, again, is in relation to submitting the very best application to avoid rejection. Next slide, please. So we like to think of ourselves as the backbone, administration, your lab's mission control. And I'm going to start by saying apologies because I'm throwing in some military jargon here and there just to stay on theme. We recognize that you submit these applications one time every 2 years, and for out-of-state labs, they submit them once a year. We understand mistakes can happen, and that's why we're here today to hopefully avoid some of those mistakes. As part of the administrative team, I like to think of us as mission control for ELAP applications. An administrative team's role is to keep things coordinated, making sure every form is filled out correctly, deadlines are met, and no important details slip through the cracks. Without strong administrative people in place, even the best labs can have errors on their application package. Your administrative systems play a vital role in both earning and maintaining your accreditation. It's more than just handling the documents. It reflects how your lab operates to ELAP by showing, 1, the level of organization in your lab, 2, your attention to detail, and 3, how well you understand and follow regulatory requirements. Many labs underestimate how crucial strong administrative processes are, so don't fall into that trap. All of that being said, we do understand that there are a lot of smaller labs that don't have a dedicated administrative team. Sometimes the same person who's running the tests is also handling the paperwork, which is a very tough balancing act. If your lab doesn't have a full-time admin squad, ELAP suggests assigning someone detail-oriented or bringing in outside help to keep things running smoothly. Next slide, please. Some operational hazards are common pitfalls when submitting ELAP applications. Submitting an application is like preparing for a mission. You want a smooth launch and a successful completion. It's important to know the difference between rejection and denial before you send in your paperwork. Rejection, when we reject an application, it's like getting stopped at the gate. Your application doesn't move forward because of administrative or regulatory mistakes. Think of it as not passing the initial inspection before the mission ever begins. Denial happens later, after ELAP's technical review. It means your application made it through the first checkpoint, but was pulled back due to issues found during the deeper evaluation, whether they be administrative, regulatory, or technical. It's like being sent back to base because your equipment wasn't mission ready. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, 40% of applications are rejected on first submission. That's close to half of all the applications not making it through the door on the first try. On top of that, 28% of the applications come in late, resulting in over $54,000 just in late fees since January 1st, 2025. So let me define what quote unquote late means in application submittal terms. If ELAP receives a complete, and I have this word in big, bold capitals in my notes. So let me say this again. If ELAP receives a complete application on January 1st, this is a hypothetical situation. We receive the application on January 1st with a due date of January 1st, it's considered on time. If ELAP receives an application on its due date January 1st, and it is missing, for example, documents from the on-site assessment, or a signature by the quality assurance manual on the quality assurance manual, or the FOA tables are incorrect in some capacity, the application is considered incomplete, will be returned or rejected, and will now be considered late, and a late fee could apply. We recommend sending the application a few weeks prior to the application due date to allow time to correct any administrative errors that may occur. The bottom line, and you're going to hear this a couple of times today, waiting until the last minute is both risky and costly. Submitting early gives you time to correct any issues and avoid those fees. Plan ahead and set yourself up for success. Again, you're going to hear the same mantra several times today. To avoid getting sidelined, remember staying organized, well informed, and most importantly, launching your mission early. Next slide, please. Okay, this chart shows the, did I skip something here? I'm sorry. Thank you, there we go, okay. This chart shows the 5 most common reasons for application rejection. Reciprocity issues, which I'll talk about a little later. Issues with the FOA tables, both PDF and Excel. Quality assurance manual deficiencies make up 15% of the rejections. On-site assessment reports, a big 30%, missing documents from the assessment. And then of course there's proficiency testing. And I'm going to talk about a little bit more on the next slides, if you would please go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the top 3 reasons for rejection. And FOA tables, fields of accreditation tables, are 35%. That's the biggest reason for rejection. Either the PDF tables are unsigned, that would trigger a rejection. Editing or manipulating the Excel FO table would be a reason for rejection because we can't import it into our database. But the number one biggest reason for FOA tables to be the cause for rejecting an application is adding new FOAs to the table. A renewal application is intended to renew your lab's current scope. If you include new FOAs in that renewal application, ELAP will have to reject it. To add, update, or otherwise change your current scope, a separate amendment application is required. And a tip for avoiding this is, again, as I said earlier, is implement an internal review process with that super detailed person in the lab to compare your current scope against the renewal application tables. This will help catch any unintentional changes before submission. And also, always download the latest FOA tables from ELAP's website before starting your application to ensure you have the most up-to-date information. Next slide, please. The second biggest reason an application is rejected is partial on-site assessment report documents. But we have really, really good news for you, is that you don't need to do anything to the audit report you receive from the assessor. All you have to do is send that whole entire thing to ELAP with your application. We've seen a lot of labs splitting up the assessment report and submitting bits and pieces here and there. Basically, you do not need to touch the assessment package. Submit what you receive. ELAP has worked closely with the TPAs to ensure the documentation you receive is complete and ready to submit. There's no need to make any changes to the final reports. For full details, there's a lot of information here. You can go to the assessment page on ELAP's website and click the link for requirements for a TPA assessment package. This is your guide to what needs to be included in the TPA documentation assessment packages that you receive. A lot of information there. Next slide, please. Okay, an inadequate quality assurance manual. T&I regulations require a much more detailed quality manual than in previous years. So a weak quality manual leaves your application vulnerable. Be sure to have the technical one of the reasons that we reject them quite often is that there's not a technical manager, quality manager signature within the last 12 months of expiration, the lab's most current review of the manual. The manual should be reviewed once a year, and at each review, there should be a signature and a date. Next slide, please. So thank you to all of the out-of-state labs that have joined us today. Yay. The reciprocity applications, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Generally, most out-of-state labs have to submit a reciprocity application annually. So all of you California labs, consider yourselves lucky because you only have to do it once every 2 years. California ELAP has not granted primary accreditation to out-of-state labs for several years. Instead, state accrediting bodies or non-governmental accreditation organizations are used. One major difference and the biggest landmine for out-of-state lab applications is that state accrediting bodies often issue certificates on the expiration date of the certificate or right around that date of the current certificate, and ELAP cannot accept a reciprocity application without an updated certificate dated past the current expiration. This would be a cause for rejection. Fortunately, the California Code of Regulations has made accommodations allowing ELAP to certify out-of-state labs so they can perform regulatory work here in California by allowing ELAP to match the primary accrediting body's certificate dates once we receive the certificate. That's all I have. Next slide, please. And now to dive into the denials, we're gonna hand this over to Ruby, who we have come to call very affectionately Ruby Sherlock Holmes Lau. She's got the sharp eye to uncover what trips up applications and how to avoid these pitfalls. Thank you all for coming. And Ruby?
Thank you, Kim. What are landmines in applications? Landmines are common mistakes or hidden problems that can hurt your chances of being accepted or approved. Mistakes or issues that seem small but can cause big problems. Next slide, please. These are the top 3 reasons for denial. Proficiency testing non-compliance, field of accreditation are not assessed, and repeat findings. Next slide, please. The number one reason for denial in a laboratory application often relates to PT non-compliance, particularly due to incorrectly reported method name. This can lead to misinterpretation of results, non-compliance with standards, and potential denial of your PT submission. Here are some tips on how to avoid this. The analyte method and matrix reported in a PT study must exactly match those listed in ELAP's FOA tables. Not being a matching expert can result in denial. Using FOA tables from ELAP website to identify which studies fulfill each FOA requirement is strategy common used by 5-star labs often deploy. Always ensure you reference the most current version of the FOA. Check all providers for available PTs to ensure you can meet all required test types. Some labs may need to obtain with more than one provider to cover all PT they need. This requires careful research and planning. Proofread or have a second person verify the method name of accuracy before giving it to your provider. The second one is no proficiency testing present. Laboratories often mistakenly do not attach all PT reports to their application submittal emails. Missing reports can cause delays in review, non-compliance with accreditation requirement, or automatic rejection of your submission. This is a common error, especially when a laboratory applying for a multiple FOAs. Again, each analyte should have a matching PT result. And double check your email attachment before sending. Make sure nothing is missing. Next slide, please. The second reason for denial is the field of accreditation not assessed. The most common reason an assessment package may lead to denial of FOAs because the assessment was not inclusive of all methods requested in the application. This typically happens because of a miscommunication between the assessor or assessment provider and the laboratory. Be prepared by printing your scope or FOA tables and reviewing it at the opening conference like critical mission intelligence. This is your first line of defense. Once you receive your report, it's vital to conduct a full review of what was assessed. If the methods assessed aren't clearly identified, it's going to be difficult for anyone, including us, to interpret the mission success. Remember, if it's not verified, it's not validated. No method left behind. Your attention to detail and clear communication can be the difference between mission success and failure. Next slide, please. The third reason for denial is something we are observing more recently as labs have their second assessment under the new regulation, and that is repeat findings. The importance of timely and effective corrective action cannot be understated. Laboratories are required to fully implement the corrective action plan that is approved during the assessment. Failure to implement corrective action within the specified timelines can result in escalated enforcement measures, including suspension or revocation of accreditation. If your reassessment reveals repeat findings, our regulation requires us to deny affected FOA. If the repeat findings is related to specific FOAs, it may be only those FOAs that are denied. However, if they reveal systemic issues, your full accreditation is at risk. The best thing is to make sure to do your timeline, review your on-site assessment report, and corrective action plan prior to your assessment to ensure you have not missed anything. Next slide, please. To reinforce a mission clarity, operational readiness, and adaptability at every level, whether you are new to the unit or leading it, this tactical toolkit can equip you in getting your accreditation certificate. Know the requirements, plan ahead, Ask questions, submit early. Next slide, please. Know what is required, read the regulation. Our website includes a link to the current ELAP laws and regulation. These include the Health and Safety Code and California Code of Regulation. Within the CCR, you'll find accreditation requirement covering the application package, field accreditation, proficiency testing, on-site assessment, and other important information. The second one is read the application form. Thoroughly review the form before submission. All required components and detailed instruction are included within the form itself. Taking the time to carefully read through the form ensures accuracy and prevents delay in processing. If you need assistance, don't hesitate to email us. Next slide, please. I can't emphasize enough, plan ahead, start early. First, schedule your assessment. We recommend beginning the scheduling process 12 months prior the submission of your application due date. Why? Because it can take up to 5 to 7 months to complete the required documents after scheduling the on-site assessment. Also, ELAP recommended to reach out to multiple assessment providers to obtain comparative information on cost and scheduling. Second, schedule your PTs early to ensure you have enough time to plan around study availability. Early planning helps ensure participation in the right study, avoid last-minute issue, keep your lab in compliance. Gathering your application documents and filling out the form is the last step that you need to apply for accreditation. The best practice is to use our planning tool after receiving an updated certificate. Next slide, please. This is the screenshot of timeline guidance tool that you will find in our ELAP website. This is only for renewal application within California, and this can help you plan for future assessment and PT acceptance window. Enter your certificate expiration date, and it will populate the date when to contact ELAP or third TPA, when the proficiency testing time frame, and when to submit the renewal application without the late fee. Next slide, please. The third tactical toolkit is submit early. We recommend submitting your renewal application 2 weeks prior of your application due date. This allows us to review your application, and if there's any missing document, you have enough time to gather the documents needed. Ensure it is proofread either by yourself or by a second person for verification. If you wait to submit your application at very last date and it's not complete, you risk of being charged for a late fee. The late fee is based on your completed application, not the date of your submission. Next slide, please. The last tactical toolkit is ask question. A smart recruit asks early, a seasoned leader still asks often. This emphasizes that a wise newcomer knows that asking questions early helps them learn faster, avoid mistakes, and grow. It's about humility and eagerness to understand. Even with experience, great leaders don't assume they know everything. They continue to seek input, challenge assumption, and learn from others. It's about staying open-minded, adaptive, and collaborative. If you require clarification or have a doubt, we encourage you to ask questions. Email us at elapca@waterboards.ca.gov or call us at 916-323-3431. Thank you. Now we're going to take some time to answer some of your questions.
And we do have some questions. We have one here. Why do all methods have to be assessed?
Hi, thank you, Kim and Ruby, for that presentation. We're all three here to answer any questions that pop up. It does look like we have just a couple. Why do all methods have to be assessed? So it is required in regulation. It's 64802.20A2. And more generally, all of the methods in your laboratory need to be assessed so that we can determine that you're competent to perform those. It's an important piece of our accreditation review. We also had another question in the chat about whether or not if you are performing your internal audit and your audit does not require, the findings of your internal audit does not require your quality manual to be updated. And so therefore you don't need to update the date. If that's the case, then you do need to include documentation of that review and that no changes were made. So that's an important piece of your internal audit. It's likely easier to just update the date and re-sign, but in lieu of that, you would want to attach documentation that says that no changes were needed for that specific year. I think that was the only two questions that we saw in chat, and I know we're a bit behind, so I think we can give the floor over to Cheyenne Simmons. Or Jen, whoever's next.
Yeah, so it's time for our first AO moment, quick, impactful insights from the accreditation officer. Here to deliver those is someone you've probably heard from, worked with, or emailed back and forth, Jennifer McLaren. Jen has been a member of the Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program since 2020. She currently serves as the program's accreditation officer following her tenure in the Program Development, Research, and Enforcement Unit. She is also certified as a EPA Drinking Water Laboratory Certification Officer and holds a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt. Jen is no stranger to the Elap conference stage. Please give her a warm welcome back. Take it away, Jen.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. It's nice to see you, kind of. As Nock introduced, I'm your laboratory accreditation officer, which means that if you have any problems or questions or unusual circumstances, I am happy to be here to help answer questions, meet with you. I try and answer my phone most of the time, so if you give me a call, I do try and talk to you guys as much as I can. So that being said, I have a little bit of extra insight on what kind of issues laboratories face, what kind of questions I get a lot of, and just general sticking points that laboratories have problems with. So I'm just going to take a few minutes here and there throughout the morning to address some of those concerns. So one thing that doesn't happen too often, but is impactful when it does, is if you've had any changes to your email address. This happens most often after your @ sign. Just let us know, because then we have accurate contact information to get in touch with you at your laboratory. So just make sure that if there's been any changes to how you want us to get a hold of you, to reach out and let us know. I would think most people here have done this, but make sure you're also on Elap's email subscription list. That way, when we send out announcements, which we don't do very often, so we won't spam you too much, but you know when something gets sent out from us that it's important. So that's how we announce this conference. It's how we announce all kinds of important things. So when we send those out, just make sure you're on the email list so that you find out about those. As our admin team so aptly mentioned, make sure that you download new FOA tables every time. That way, you have the most accurate information, as well as make sure that you're not editing those FOA tables once you download them. That will cause, as they talked about, those rejections, right? So make sure that we don't want to mess with those too much. And then I know I'm short on time, so I will give one more quick tip, and then I'll pass it off back to Nock. Make sure when you submit your emails, we know there's lots of attachments a lot of times with your application emails, so make sure you number them. This is email 1 of however many, 2 of however many, but then I also will tack on to that, include in the body of the email, of each email, what the attachments are that you're putting on that email. That way our admin staff will read it. They will, yes, I see that attachment, I see that attachment. Oh, it looks like we missed an attachment, and they will reach back out to you and say, hey, think we missed one of your attachments, which can make a big difference when there's a PT report that you thought you attached that didn't actually end up getting attached. Our team will let you know, and that will save you some heartache on the back end if anything gets denied, right? You don't want to miss an attachment and then not get some of your line items because a PT report didn't get put in that you thought was there. So with that, I will see you all a little bit later this morning.
Thank you so much for that information, Jen. Next up, let's talk about assessments. We all know preparing for an assessment is one of the most critical steps in maintaining laboratory accreditation. It's not just about passing the assessment, it's about a culture of quality and continual readiness. How do you prepare for an assessment so that it's not just successful, but smooth and efficient? What can you do in advance to avoid surprises and make sure your team shines? Whether you're seasoned or new to the accreditation process, this presentation will offer valuable insights on how to prepare effectively. Cheyenne Simmons from A2LA is here to break it down, providing clear steps and best practices for pre-assessment planning, document organization, and communication strategies that work. Cheyenne is the Senior Accreditation Officer with the American Association for Laboratory Accreditation. Here, she works as the point of contact and sub-program lead for the Department of Defense Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program and Department of Energy Consolidated Audit Program Accreditation Program. Let's give a warm welcome to A2LA's Cheyenne Simmons.
Thank you, Knock, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Cheyenne Simmons, and I'm a Senior Accreditation Officer on the environmental team with A2LA, which is one of the third-party assessment agencies for those who may not know. Today, I'll be going over a guide to assessment readiness and how laboratories can prepare for the California ELAP assessments. So just taking a quick look at the agenda, I'll be going over what laboratories can do internally before submitting an application to their TPA, what is required to be submitted as part of that application, what the assessor is going to look for on site during the assessment, and what labs will want to have in place prior to the assessor coming on site. And then we'll wrap up with trending nonconformances for quality systems. So starting with preparing to apply and what laboratories can do internally before submitting an application to their TPA. Labs can ensure that staff is trained and any corresponding records are up to date, such as initial and ongoing demonstrations of capabilities. Something to keep in mind here is that you will need at least one analyst who is fully trained and authorized to perform the methods on your intended scope. You can always have numerous analysts, but at minimum, you will need one. Labs can ensure that all documents and procedures are up to date. This ranges from data integrity and procedures related to quality to technical methods and the SOPs used to perform the methods on your scope. A pretty common question we get as a TPA is, well, what if we need to make any changes to our documents from when we first submitted our application to when the assessor comes on site? That is no problem, and it actually does happen pretty often. You can always let your TPA know in advance if you have something in the pipeline, or the assessor should be reaching out prior to the assessment to gather any additional documents that they may need, and they may ask if there have been any changes since you first applied. If they don't, then you can use that time as an opportunity to let them know what documents were revised. The key here is just to be as transparent as possible and communicate with your TPA and assessor. The third thing labs can do is ensure that all equipment is in-house and operational, which includes both testing and measuring equipment. So say you have a balance that needs to be sent out for its annual calibration, you'll want to schedule that service with enough time for the calibration company to perform the calibration, for the balance to be sent back to you if applicable. Some of the calibration providers will come into your lab, and for your staff to perform any review processes of the balance once back in the lab. The same thing goes for consumables such as standards. Or if you have a piece of equipment such as an autoclave that needs maintenance performed on it, try and have that work done with enough time to ensure that any verifications that may need to take place are completed and records are updated accordingly. And then finally, labs can make sure they are ready to apply by making sure proficiency testing is completed and that the analyte method and matrix reported in the PT study matches the ELAP field of accreditation tables. For initial and amendment applicants, PTs must be completed before you submit your application to California, and for renewal applications, PT must be completed during the second year of your certificate before the application due date, and annual PTs are due before the end of your first year of your certificate. Some common PT errors include not performing PT in general, misreporting a method, using the wrong matrix, completing PT outside of the required time frame, and not checking with all PT providers for available studies. When it comes to when should a laboratory submit their application to their TPA, there are a few things you'll want to consider. You'll want to apply with enough time to allow the assessment to take place. For the report to be provided to you by your TPA, any corrective action plans to be submitted and reviewed, and ample review time of the application by California Elap. So the general rule of thumb is to apply to your TPA at least 6 to 9 months prior to your expiration date to help prevent any delays. So now that you've prepared internally, what is required to be submitted as part of the application to your TPA? Labs will need to provide an organizational chart, updated quality manual, previous on-site assessment report, or OSAR, if you are a renewal or amendment applicant, and the intended scope. And then we'll go through these a little bit more in depth on the next few slides. So with your organizational chart, that's going to be exactly what it sounds like. It's going to be an overview of your lab's organization. This should include the structure and relationship between the functions of the lab. Ideally, this should include the names of the staff members who are trained and authorized to perform the methods on your scope, as it's likely the assessor will use this to determine who they're going to interview and observe during the on-site assessment. While we cannot require names to be included on the organizational chart, especially if this is left off due to any confidentiality reasonings, it may help save some upfront work for the assessor, and they can send out their agenda sooner rather than later, and you can make sure that those selected staff members are available and ready to go. So with your quality manual, we want to make sure that this is up to date once it's submitted. It must meet the requirements of the 2016 D&I standard, Volume 1, Module 2, Sections 4.2.8.3 and 4.2.8.4. So Section 4.2.8.3 is going to be the document formalities or structure, and there are 9 requirements within this section that must be included, such as the document title, the lab name and address, the effective date, and identification of the approved signatories. Section 4.2.8.4 is going to be the required content and or references, and there are 18 requirements within the section that must be included, such as all procedures for maintenance, calibrations, and verifications, procedures for reporting data, the structure of the laboratory, job descriptions of key staff, and procedures for sample handling. When submitting your previous on-site assessment report, or again, your OSAR, you'll want to provide the entire report, which should include the report the assessor completed, the scope with initials for all methods, any checklists used by the assessor, your organizational chart, attendance sheets from the assessment briefings, assessment interviewee form, non-conformance report, assessment agenda, qualifications and conflicts of interest form, and the corrective action plan or CAP review documentation. Along with your CAP review documentation, if you submitted any supplemental information along with your responses, such as templates, revisions made to SOPs, or training records, those should be provided as well. And lastly, for your application to your TPA, you'll want to submit your intended scope and identify any changes you may want to make, including removing, updating, or adding methods. Assessors are able to assess the updated or additional methods during your renewal assessment, but keep in mind that a separate application will need to be submitted to California Elap for those amendments. You are able to use the renewal OSAR and CAP documentation for the amendment application as well, as long as the report includes the changes requested. And there is a section within the OSAR that the assessor fills out if there are any change requests, so there should be no problem with using the same report. But if you do notice that any of the changes are missing, you can always reach out to your TPA. So you prepared internally, you've submitted your application, and now moving on to the on-site assessment and what the assessor will be reviewing. They're going to look for documentation and records for compliance with the 2016 D&I standard. All labs, regardless of what type of testing you perform, are going to be assessed to 2 things. That's going to be Title 22 CA CCR Section 64802.15 for proficiency testing and Module 2 for quality systems. A quick note about Module 2 is that within the CCR for TNI-2, labs are not required to meet sections 4.1.7.2.f for the technical manager qualifications or section 5.2.6, the technical manager requirements. There is still that requirement to have a technical manager. However, the exceptions loosen these requirements, which may allow for individuals with different qualifications to serve as that point of contact of technical manager. You'll see that modules 3 through 6 have asterisks, and that's because these modules are dependent on the fields of accreditation that you are seeking recognition for. So module 3 is going to be for asbestos, module 4 is chemical testing, module 5 is microbiology testing, and then module 6 is for radiochemistry. And then you can find out more information about the field of accreditation tables on the California ELAP website. So while on site, the assessor is going to review documentation, which will include procedures and protocols. There is a clause within the standard, which is Volume 1, Module 2, 4.2.8.5, that requires all procedures to be documented for all lab activities, which does include quality and technical procedures. So again, including data integrity, corrective actions, complaints, and all methods. So you want to make sure that you have those procedures in place and that staff members are following what is written. In addition to having procedures and protocols in place, all documents must be reviewed and approved prior to issue, and you must ensure that your staff has access to the documents they need. Even if your staff says they know the test methods like the back of their hand, they need to have access. And sometimes during assessments, assessors will ask the individual they are interviewing to pull up their most up-to-date version of the SOP, and the individual isn't sure where to find it. So not only ensuring that your staff has access, but also they know where to find it in case they need to reference it. Documents must be uniquely identified and include a variety of things such as an issue date or revision status, page numbers, total number of pages, or some other sort of indication at the end of the document, and then the person responsible for issuing the document. Any obsolete documents that are kept for legal or other purposes must be marked to prevent unintended use, and then you must have a document control procedure in place. Kind of going back to an earlier slide, the assessor will be reviewing records in addition to your documents. For your records, you'll want to make sure that these are readily available, which is typically by the end of the assessment. If you aren't able to find a record by the end of the assessment, a non-conformance may be written. Records can be hard copy or kept electronically, and all records must be kept for a minimum of 5 years. If there are federal or local regulations that you adhere to that have a longer retention time, say 10 years, then you must follow the most strict requirement. And then lastly, all data must be in legible permanent ink. If data is produced by an automatic system, that's okay, and that will meet this requirement. You don't have to then transcribe the data using a pen or a marker. And this is just to summarize the entire assessment process on the end of a TPA. We have this little visual overview. So starting with number 1 and moving clockwise, first labs will submit a quote request to their TPA, which may include the intended scope and preferred assessment dates. The TPA will provide a quote based on the intended scope, and labs must accept or deny the quote. If the quote is accepted, an assessor is assigned, and the assessor will reach out to schedule the assessment with the laboratory directly. Once the assessor performs the assessment, the TPA has 30 days from the exit briefing to release the report to the laboratory. Once the lab receives the report, they then have 30 days to submit their corrective action plans or their CAP. The CAP is reviewed by the TPA, and if it's deemed acceptable, the notice of completion and the CAP review summary is sent to the lab and the assessment is closed. However, if additional CAPs are required, the lab has another 30 days from when the request is made to provide the additional information. Once the CAP is deemed acceptable, again, the notice of completion and CAP review summary is sent to the lab and the assessment is closed on the TPA side. You'll then have to submit your OSAR and the CAP review documentation to California ELAP for review and final accreditation decisions. And to wrap up, we're going to go over some trending nonconformances to see where common gaps are found within quality systems and what you may want to take a close look at as you prepare for your assessment. So starting with 4.15.1 in management reviews, this clause requires you to have a predetermined schedule and procedure for management reviews, and that reviews must be conducted periodically. It's common to see laboratories either not follow their predetermined schedule or not include the required topics that must be taken into consideration, such as complaints, recommendations for improvement, and customer feedback. Next is 4.3.2.1 in document approval and issue. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but this clause requires you to review documents prior to integrating them into your management system. But the clause also requires you to maintain a master list or an equivalent document control procedure that identifies the current revision status of all documents, which is where we kind of see laboratories overlooking. Third is 4.13.3 in technical records. This clause lists out several additional requirements for records that you want to ensure you have, in addition to what's listed out in the individual technical modules. The most common requirement that's overlooked is the reconstruction of data. You'll want to ensure that you have all information necessary to reconstruct data from sample receipt to reporting. And then lastly is 5.4.6.2 in measurement of uncertainty. This clause requires you to have a procedure for estimating measurement of uncertainty, and that it shall be calculated unless the nature of the test method prevents it from happening. In those cases, you must at least attempt to identify contributions to measurement uncertainty and make reasonable estimation. Again, there are other areas in the standard where gaps may be found, but these are just a few of the ones we've seen over the last year or so. And that's everything I have for today. If you have any questions or are just interested in learning more, my contact information is listed. And then you'll also see the contact information for our environmental program manager, Stephanie Rapan, who is also happy to help. And then on the right, there is a direct link to our quote request form. So if you are interested in assessment, you can use that link and it'll ask you a few questions just to get you started on the process.
Thank you for that informative presentation, Cheyenne. We do have a question for you. Can we get a quote from you if we had our OSA performed by a different TPA last time?
Yes, you can submit, again, you can just submit that through our quote request form, and we'll just ask for your intended scope at that time just to give you the quote request. And then once you actually do start to submit the application, you'll want to make sure that you are including the previous OSAR report from that different TPA.
Okay, thank you again, Cheyenne. Now that we've talked about preparation, let's shift our focus to what actually happens during an assessment and go a level deeper inside the assessment itself. What happens when assessors walk through your door? What are some of the best practices that labs can adopt to make the process productive? Our next speaker represents PJLA and has extensive experience evaluating laboratories. Here to walk us through the assessment process is Matthew Sika from Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation Incorporated. In his role as PJLA's Technical Program Manager, Matthew understands what assessors are looking for and what it takes for laboratories to be assessment ready. Whether you are approaching your first assessment or your 10th, this session will offer valuable insights on how to approach the process with a mindset of continual improvement. Please join me in welcoming Matthew Sika of Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation Incorporated to the Elap conference page.
Thank you. I'm Matt Sika. Today's session is really about what to expect during an assessment and a little bit before. Next slide, please. Perry Johnson Lab Accreditation is an internationally recognized accreditation body playing a vital role in ensuring quality and competence in a range of critical fields. We also work with a variety of variety of governmental schemes, both at state level and federal level. Next slide, please. So today's presentation is really designed to give you a comprehensive overview of the assessment process. We'll walk through some of the pre-assessment steps to the final stages of corrective action. This way you can gain some clarity on the roles and responsibilities of both the TPA as well as you as the CAB or conformity assessment body. In this case, you're all laboratories, as well as the purpose and structure of how we do assessments, including assessment plans. We'll also examine how objective evidence is collected and evaluated, and the importance of consistent and accurate documentation. And then finally, we'll address how nonconformities are managed and what's required of the CAB post-assessment to maintain momentum towards a successful completion of the assessment. Next slide. Once the application has been submitted and reviewed, we're going to assume here that the preliminary administration steps are complete, meaning the TPA has all the necessary information to proceed with the planning of the assessment. The next step is the assessment confirmation. At this point, the TPA will verify the intended scope of the assessment with the CAB. This includes determining whether the assessment is for a full scope or scope expansion, which really helps us define the assessment effort required. The TPA then will work with the CAB to develop and clarify the scope in more detail. With this information aligned, we can proceed to coordinate and schedule the assessment with the laboratory, ensuring all logistics are confirmed well in advance. Next slide. So the assignment of the assessment team is a critical step in ensuring a competent and impartial evaluation. The TPA assigns assessors based on their technical expertise and experience relevant to the applicant CAB's scope of accreditation. This ensures that each aspect of the CAB's activities are reviewed by qualified personnel. To maintain impartiality, all team members are required to declare any potential conflicts of interest, such as prior employment, consulting relationships, or even other associations that could influence objectivity. Importantly, the CAB has the right to object to any team member of that assigned team if there's a concern regarding their impartiality or suitability. TPAs will then review any objections, and if justified, will assign alternate assessors. This process reinforces the integrity and fairness of the assessment process. Next slide. As part of the pre-assessment phase, the TPA will typically request of the CAB a list that outlines the specific documents and records required for review. This ensures that all necessary materials, such as quality manuals, technical procedures, and even some records related to objective evidence, such as internal audit and management review, are available to support an effective assessment. It's critical that the CAB submits these documents well in advance of the scheduled assessment. Delays or incomplete submissions can result in postponed assessments or the need for additional time on site, which obviously affect both timelines and cost. Once received, the lead assessor and team members conduct a thorough review to verify the CAB's documented system complies with the applicable standard. This also helps the assessor prepare efficiently and identify any needs for additional clarification during the on-site assessment. Next slide, please. The assessment plan is the key preparation document developed by the lead assessor. It outlines the standard being evaluated, the assessment dates, times, locations, assigns responsibilities to each assessment team member. This ensures clarity and structure throughout the assessment process. The TPI typically provides this, probably at least 30 days before the scheduled assessment. This advance notice allows the CAB to review the details and request, additional adjustments, such as modifications due to staffing, workflow, or site-specific constraints. Early coordination through the assessment plan really helps ensure a smooth, efficient assessment and sets clear expectations for all parties involved. Next slide, please. So at the start of the assessment, the lead assessor and team members will hold an opening meeting with the CAB's designated points of contact and any additional personnel that the CAB wishes to include. The purpose of this meeting is to review the assessment plan, confirm the intended scope of accreditation, and determine whether any adjustments are necessary based on the current conditions. We all understand kids get sick, life goes on outside the laboratory. We're amenable to adjusting the schedule, but it helps if we know well in advance. During this time, the CAB should also inform the assessment team of any applicable facility protocols, such as safety requirements, restricted access areas, security measures, fire measures that must be observed during the visit. When appropriate, the team may also request a brief tour of the facility. This allows assessors to orient themselves with the layout and better understand where the testing activities will be conducted. Next slide, please. So during the assessment, the lead assessor and team will sample the CAB's management system and technical operations to evaluate conformity with the T&I requirements. The assessment approach may vary depending on the nature of the assessment, but regardless of the format, assessors are required to gather and record objective evidence related to the specific areas that they are responsible for evaluating. This evidence will be captured with detail to justify their determination whether a requirement has been met, not met, or is not applicable. Next slide. So to evaluate conformance and technical competence and the effectiveness of the management system itself, assessors use a variety of techniques based on the type of assessment being conducted. So this includes witnessing, where assessors observe personnel performing their routine tasks. Typically, this is focused on testing. Additionally, during that witnessing that testing, we're doing some level of equipment review, which we're looking at the calibration logs, the traceability records, the maintenance logs, determining the equipment suitability for its intended use. Interviews are typically conducted from start to finish of the assessment. And it's really a sample staff to confirm that they have an understanding of both their procedures and responsibilities, as well as where they fit in the management system itself. Additionally, the team reviews a selection of documents and technical records, both the pre-submitted documents and those requested during the assessment, to verify compliance and traceability. Remember, we're trying to be able to understand historical reconstruction of reports. Where applicable, a review of reports really ensures that data supporting the accredited parameters is really documented in that historical traceable approach. And then finally, the assessment team evaluates PT activities. In this case, it also performs, if performance issues are observed, they're going to also examine the corrective actions to see that they were taken to address any issues. Next slide. Assessment findings are documented by the team using that objective evidence throughout the assessment. For every accreditation requirement reviewed, the team will conclude whether the laboratory is conforming, non-conforming, or if the requirement's not applicable. Both the lead assessor and the assessment team are responsible for documenting the evidence in sufficient detail to support each determination. This documentation not only justifies the finding, but forms the foundation of a future accreditation recommendation. When a requirement is found to be non-conforming, the lead assessor will formally document the non-conformance. This includes a clear description of the issue, the relevant clause or requirement, and the evidence observed during the assessment. And it's really important because such transparency ensures that the CAB can respond effectively during that next corrective action phase. Next slide, please. So at the conclusion of the assessment, the lead assessor will conduct a formal closing meeting with the laboratory representatives. Attendance will be recorded to document who participated in that discussion. One of the key activities during the closing meeting is the review and finalization of the draft scope. This draft outlines what testing the laboratory is going to seek for accreditation, and it's been concurred by the assessment team. Both the assessment team and the CAB will work together to ensure that the accuracy of that scope description before the close of that assessment. The assessment team will then present a summary of the assessment report and review any identified non-conformances. Also at this time, these non-conformances will be clearly explained with the opportunity for the laboratory to ask questions or seek clarification. Because it's always a challenge to get a really clear nonconformity sometimes during that short time that the assessor is on site. Next slide, please. And then finally, some post-assessment activities. The laboratory is required to submit a corrective action response for each nonconformance within 30 days of the closing meeting. This response must include a detailed report identifying how they evaluated the issue, identifying the root cause, and outlining corrective action plans, providing a clear timeline for implementation and completion. Once submitted, the lead assessor or team will review the corrective action reports to determine if the response sufficiently addresses the issue and its broader impact. This review ensures that the nonconformance is not only corrected in the future, but that similar recurrences are effectively mitigated. The assessor will then communicate their determination both back to the laboratory and to the TPA, either confirming that the response is acceptable or requesting revisions when necessary to meet accreditation requirements. Next slide, please. So in summary, the TPA assessment process is really structured, made to be transparent, and it's collaborative. From the initial application to the closing meeting, each step is guided by defined procedures and driven by an evidence-based evaluation. Clear communication between the TPA and the CAB is vital, whether during document review, scope confirmation, or assessment scheduling. Objective evidence really forms the backbone of all findings and recommendations, ensuring credibility and consistency throughout the process, regardless of what TPA is chosen. Nonconformities, while not uncommon, must be addressed thoroughly and promptly with a focus on cause analysis and additional actions when required. Ultimately, a successful assessment is a joint effort achieved through mutual diligence, preparation, and shared commitment to competence and compliance. Next slide, please. So thank you for your attention. I can be reached at any time at msika@pjlabs.com.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Matthew. It's time for another quick but powerful AO moment with Jen. Jen will be popping in throughout the day with meaningful insights and useful tips, all grounded in her experience and passion for quality and continual improvement. These 5-minute nuggets are designed to help you think differently and stay one step ahead. Jen, over to you.
Thanks again, Knock. Just one thought I heard during Cheyenne's presentation. She recommended reaching out to the TPA 6 to 9 months before expiration. But let's remember, your applications are due 3 months before you expire. So I would tack an additional 3 months on the front of that line and suggest 9, and really probably closer to 12 months before your expiration to start reaching out and get your on-site assessment scheduled and performed. One other quick thought is just really kind of hitting on those FOA tables, making sure that your PT matches the method the way it's listed on our FOA tables, making sure that you're running things in the correct matrix. I think some people don't realize the power of those FOA tables, and one thing that is fantastic is many of those FOA tables have matrix information in footnotes at the bottom. So make sure that you're reading those, avoid some pain points there. And then also, if you are considering adding a new method during your on-site assessment, one of the easiest ways to make sure your documentation all lines up is to print out the FOA table and have the assessor initial exactly which FOA that they observed. And that just is just super clear. It's easier for the assessors. It's easy for ELAP to make sure that everyone's on the same page and we all are speaking the same language with our methods and our FOAs and our PTs. And then also just a quick thought too, ELAP and pretty much anyone, I know any other states as well, we do not accept amended PT reports that have been changed for any reason. So make sure that you double and triple check the information on your PT reports, including your laboratory address. I mean, sometimes those change if you've relocated, that's a whole other can of worms, but making sure that there are sometimes, you know, that especially with municipal labs, the address is sometimes the billing address as opposed to your laboratory address. So just make sure that the address reflected on your PT reports is where the laboratory is located. And with that, I will hand it back to Knock.
Thank you very much, Jen. Now let's shift our focus to something central to laboratory work, standard methods. Next, we are honored to welcome Dr. Terry Baxter to the ELAP conference stage. Dr. Baxter is a long-standing contributor and expert associated with standard methods for the examination of water and wastewater. He is a professor of environmental engineering at Northern Arizona. And to hear directly from someone who helps shape them. Please welcome Dr. Terry Baxter to the 2025 ELAP conference stage.
Thank you, Knock. I guess I had to turn my mic on myself. I first want to express my appreciation for being here today, to you, to Leanne, and to Karen in particular. So with that, let's jump into this, and I'm not sure if I can try to make up some time or not, but that's going to be sort of my goal. So I apologize to whoever's forwarding the slides, but I'll try to be clear about when to shift. Okay, so what I want to talk about this morning is just how standard methods is organized, what we do, how we do it, and for me, the importance of the volunteers and all of the stakeholders across not just the United States, but the world that provide the input to make standard methods what it is. And Next slide. And I thought I'd start with a brief history. And this slide, I added the bar on the bottom to it. And this is the slide that some of you may have already seen from maybe Hunter Adams, I believe, who has presented this slide before. But it kind of gives a brief history of standard methods and some other activities that go on that are relevant to standard methods and what we interface with. And so USGS, I know when in graduate school, that was a source for analytical methods that we would look to. And so USGS has been around for a while, since 1879 actually is when Congress authorized the USGS. And I guess we're deauthorizing some of everything in the federal government now. But as it turns out, then you've got ASTM was also in the works around 1898 was when Charles Dudley, who's a chemist, he and another group of scientists and engineers formed ASTM, and in 1902 it was officially founded as an American section underneath the International Association for Testing Materials. And then NBS, the National Bureau of Standards, which is now NIST, actually was authorized in 1901 by Congress. And standard methods, next slide, if we could have that, actually was doing some work. There was a group of individuals mostly involved with microbiological methods and associated with the American Public Health Association. And they were beginning some work in 1894. And they decided that there needed to be a little bit more uniformity and efficiency associated with some of the methods that they were working with. So they got together and published in 1905 in the Journal of Infectious Diseases, you see there on the left. And I'll just digress here a little bit. So one of the nice things about working at a university is you have access through the library subscription to a lot of online resources. And I probably would have never been able to find this, the Journal of Infectious Disease article, if it wasn't for the fact that I could access that through the Klein Library here at NAU. But the image on the right is the very first standard methods. And again, American Public Health Association was responsible for that. If we could have the next slide. That's what it was, and this is what the most recent edition was, what it looks like, so much different. And you all know that it's a book, and I fell in love with that book when I was a graduate student, and I still love it. And I've been buying them ever since the 15th edition. But you can sort of see a little bit of the timeline and the individuals involved in the committees that and where they met to get up to that very first edition. And you can, if you're interested, you could find it online, with some effort to, to download a PDF of that very first edition too. But so that's kind of the journey that I think that was fascinating for me to learn that standard methods was pretty old. And it has always been volunteers that have been doing the work. So next slide. Again, American Public Health Association sort of kicked it off, and I don't remember the exact dates, but somewhere in the late 1920s, American Water Works Association kind of came in there, and then late 1930s, mid 1930s through 1940, what is now Water Environment Federation joined in. And so those three organizations sponsor standard methods. We're actually a subcommittee officially underneath the laboratory committee of WEF is kind of where we sit, but really we operate underneath all three organizations. We are a voluntary consensus consensus standard body because of the way we work. That's pretty much how we've always been. We have methods that initially, from 1905, were really focused on the biological and microbiological methods, but there were a lot of physical and chemical methods that were included in that first edition that impacted some of the other methods. And so there's always been sort of a mix of type of methods in there. I'm not sure when the radiological started coming in, but probably after the 1940s for sure. But there's, I just want to again stress upon the importance of the volunteers. We do have 2 employees who are actually working, and if I could have the next slide, as paid individuals. That's Nathan Edmond. He's our standard methods manager, and he's actually is employed by American Waterworks Association. And then Sophia Cook, she's our manager of editing all the methods to get them online and in the book. And she's a consultant, so to speak, but she gets paid as well. And I think through American Public Health Association, if I'm not incorrect on that. Everybody else is a volunteer. And you can kind of get an image there. Right now we do not have a joint editorial board liaison or member with American Public Health Association right now. Each of those organizations have the responsibility for appointing the joint editorial board member. Bill Lips is representative for American Waterworks Association, and I'm a Water Environment Federation. And if anybody knows anybody would be great for the person who does biology, microbiology, and toxicology kind of area, that's a person we could use, I think, to round out that board. Next. We do have, as you see in that center graphic right there, we've got 10 parts to standard methods. Each of them are focused on different types of methodologies. And then each of those are overlooked, if you will, by part coordinators. And part coordinators are pretty important. They kind of keep everything running within their area as smooth as possible. And we've got Christina Baker, who is with Part 1000. And Part 1000 is, we've sort of retitled that to the Analytical and Data Quality Systems. And it typically applies to all the other parts within standard methods. Devin Morgan is Part 2000, and that's the physical and aggregate properties, includes turbidity, color, solids, and whatnot. And Jennifer Calles is Part 3000 for metals. Lisa Ramirez, Part 4000 for inorganic nonmetals. That'd be phosphorus and nitrogen, say, for instance. Robin Parnell, who I think I saw is on, is Part 5000, and that's the aggregate organics, and some of the classics there are going to be BOD and COD. 6000 is the individual organics, and we're going through sort of a major update of the methods in Part 6000 underneath Hunter Adams leading on that. Bob Shanahan has been very strong in supporting Part 7000 and the radiological methods, and that actually is a very close, tight-knit group that works in that area. Timothy Rice is a relatively recent addition to Part 8000, and that's a toxicology assessment. Elizabeth Turner, also fairly recent, coming in. We've had the previous part coordinator was reassigned at EPA, and so they weren't able to continue. And So Elizabeth's been coming in and she's doing real well, keeping that section going for the microbiology. And then Polly Barrowman is the aquatic biology assessment, also fairly recent. So we've had some new turnover in our park coordinators and whatnot in recent time, and that's been kind of exciting, but also kind of, you know, a little worrisome in terms of how things were, how we thought things might go, but it's all been going pretty well. Underneath that, in that center part, we've got that yellow joint task group. That's where a lot of the work happens in actually working on methods, revising the methods, developing new methods, updating methods that need to be, you know, even if just they're minor updates, the joint task group will be involved with that. And each of these individuals, right on through the joint editorial board members, such as myself, William, and the park coordinators, the joint task group members, are all made up of somebody who's on the standard methods committee. Next slide. And those individuals can, or what I refer to as a global body of experts. And right now we have in the neighborhood of about 320 active standard methods committee members. And they range from public sector and private sector type memberships, and you can kind of see where they come from in terms of their background. Next slide. And one of the things that we've been doing for the last few years is trying to update some of the documentation that we've had. So we've always had sort of a standard operating procedure for standard methods, and it might have been a few pages long. And since, from what I can remember, since about 2015, we would go into meetings, we'd say, oh, we need to update that, we need to update that. And so we finally got around to doing that in the fall of 2022 and finished it in 2023. And so you can find this on the website, but it really lays out a little bit more about what we do, how we do it, some of the processes associated with balloting, developing the methods, and the idea of participation and how that is, how participation is defined as being an active versus sort of a nascent, non-active individual. Next slide. One of the other things that we intentionally tried to embed into that new SOP that was created was this idea of aligning with ANSI. Now, I just want to make sure that you understand standard methods is not ANSI accredited, but we wanted to make sure that we are aligned with what we do and how we operate with ANSI. And so the discussion on the table about whether or not we would seek ANSI accreditation is sort of still one that I think we haven't closed out and said, yeah, we're going to do it. I think if we were to do that, we'd need to have more than just Nathan and Sophia as being paid individuals for standard methods. And again, everybody's volunteers. And I think there's been sort of this life balance thing that I've heard throughout some of the talks in terms of, people do have families, and we also have jobs that we actually get paid for doing. So that kind of, I always tell individuals who I talk with who are either joint task group chairs or park coordinators, that's one thing I just wish they remember, is that they are a volunteer. And we all would like to do more for standard methods, but sometimes it's just, we can't, we get pulled away from other work. But one of the things that we do is we are open to anyone who has an interest, who has some experience and expertise. All of those things are valuable that can come in and help create that community, if you will, and culture. We talked a little bit about culture earlier. And in terms of what standard methods can accomplish. And a person doesn't need to belong to American Public Health Associations, Water Environment Federation, or American Water Works Association to be on the Standard Methods Committee. And it costs nothing other than the time that you put into it, of course. Next slide. And as we start working on methods, and one of the things that is also aligning with ANSI is the idea of consensus. Now, I can recall early on when I became more involved with standard methods beyond just the standard methods committee member level, and I was a joint task group chair, that it seemed like to me that there was this idea that we had to have 100% yes votes on everything. And that's not consensus, that's unanimity. And so we wanted to make sure that this was well defined in terms of what we mean by consensus. And so we had, in the balloting process, as it passes through the method revision or method development, the joint task group, again, is where most of the work happens. And so the joint task group, once they're done with the work that they've been charged to do, they have to take a ballot and they have to vote on whether they approve or not of what they've created. And they have to have 67% of the ballots returned, and 67% of those need to be affirmative to create the consensus. And then once that occurs, the draft is sent to the joint editorial board, and we look at that, and we need to make an approval whether or not that now can continue to the full standard methods committee, who will be balloting the method to approve it. And that requires, for the three of us, when we have three, that requires it to have all three of us approve it in order for it to proceed forward. So that's the consensus there, means all of us. Once it's sent to the Standard Methods Committee, and usually you don't have, so you're not going to have all 320 people vote on the ballot for all the methods. You're going to have individuals who have declared certain interest in certain method areas, and those are the ones that would be balloting on it because they're considered the experts related to those particular methods. So of those ballots that are sent out, half of those, or 50%, must be returned. Otherwise, that's Nathan's job. He's got to contact them to see if he can get more of those in, because again, they're volunteers. They got other things going on in their life, and we all understand that they sometimes forget that, oh yeah, I was supposed to do this ballot. I'll get that tomorrow. And then 3 weeks later, they haven't done it. So it's understandable. And then on those, in order to approve the method, we need to have 90% yes votes on that. If that doesn't happen, that it goes back to the JTG. And usually when we have a negative vote or a no, that's one thing I think is really commendable about standard methods that I learned early on, is if you have a negative ballot vote, it has to be addressed. You can't ignore it. And ideally, you want to try to get that addressed in the current cycle, so that the issues associated with that negative ballot can be incorporated into the new updated method that's going to be approved. If not, then it would maybe push over to the next effort to revise the method in the future. But you've got to make the promise to the individual who has a negative ballot that it will be addressed. And there was just an example that occurred some time ago in one of the odor methods, and it took maybe 4 years before we got it reincorporated into a new joint task group to get it addressed. So that it takes time to do that, but we did it. And so I felt good about the fact that we honored this idea that all negative votes must be addressed. There are some negative votes that are, people will vote no that say, oh, well, I don't like the way that's worded. And those are really don't impact the technical nature of the method. And so that's really can be reclassified as an editorial negative. And so it's not really counted as a negative vote in the sense of the technical content of the method that's being approved. But we still try to address it. And that, again, is another thing that I think is extremely important. We don't ignore those comments that we get. And so we value those comments across the board. We do have, one of the things that we did try to stress in the new SOP was that if we get a negative vote on a technical issue that needs to be changed, then it needs to be a little bit more than I just don't like it. It needs to have substance associated with why, needs to be persuasive, and if in all possibility, it needs to provide what would the fix be that would satisfy the individual who provided the negative vote. Next. And then we just, let's see, did we jump one, I think? Or did we go back? Oh no, maybe I jumped one. Go back to, let's see, yeah, let's go to balance of interest, I guess. Thanks. We do have, one of the things that we do when we form a joint task group member is we try to make sure that we have a balance of individuals that are representing different, what we call stakeholders. And we've got very broadly defined stakeholder categories. Users is one, producers is the other. Users would be the individuals in the lab using the methods, right? Producers would be people who are producing either reagents or instruments or other supplies that would be used in the process of conducting the method, so they get money for that. And then general interest would be others who may not use the methods as much, but are part of that group of people who are interested in standard methods and use standard methods to some extent, but not that's not a day-to-day activity for them. And so we try to get those to balance. The producers, we try to make sure that they are only about a third of the JTG. We can have multiple one producer on there, and we try to get, maybe other producers that are with other companies, so that we don't have a bias associated with just one company. But there is a problem sometimes of trying to get enough people on a joint task group and to get the balance. And so that we do have the ability to go ahead and approve a joint task group that maybe doesn't have the balance that we would totally like. And we can't take forever to try to create that, but that's the goal. And we've been pretty good about getting that done recently. We do have producers bring a valuable expertise to the table. And in some cases, they might be an appropriate person to lead the joint task group as the chair. And in that case, the JEB has got to have 100% approval to do that. A part coordinator could also be a chair. If it's in their part, then they are non-voting, and it also has to be approved. If they work in another part, however, they're just like any other standard methods committee member for that part, and they could be a chair in that part with no problem. Next slide. And for due process, that's another item that we have. Again, all of this is for aligning with ANSI. And so anybody can, if they don't like what's going on with the process or any action that was taken, they can let us know, and typically they'll contact Nathan directly on that. And we use the process that the guidance from ANSI gives us, and so that's what we follow. And any of the comments or any kind of finalization of a due process decision is available, and people would just contact Nathan for that. Next. So just sort of the part of this might be kind of recap, but different words there, and I'll let you read those. But again, the Standard Methods Committee is the experts. The committee members make up all of the individuals that do the actual work in the joint task group, the coordinators who actually manage everything that's actually happening. And from the level of the Standard Methods Committee membership early on, a person might just be receiving methods and reviewing them and balloting them on, positive, negative, making comments, that kind of thing. So it's not a lot of time invested at the SMC level. At the joint task group level, there's a little bit more involvement, especially you're busy helping develop or revise the method. The joint task group chair, if we can go to the next slide, is another level of increase of volunteer time. And but they're the ones that kind of make sure that the joint task group keeps on task and communicates back and forth directly with the part coordinator. Part coordinator on the right there, again, is something that does require an additional level of time, the volunteer time. And in some cases, they need to talk to their employer to say, is it going to be okay for me to do this? And so that's another thing that even probably at the joint task group level, we've have some individuals who need to contact their employers to get approval to be a joint task group chair, because it does take more time at both of these coordinator positions in terms of the part and for the joint task group itself. Next slide. So this is the SOP document, or not the SOP. This is a charge document. And this is the document that's created to give the joint task group sort of their mission, if you will. And it will lay out sort of the rationale for why this update is being done, and then what the more specific tasks that are involved with doing that, the timeline associated with trying to get it done, and then the deliverables that are associated with it. So it's sort of a contract, so to speak. But it's not, even though the joint editorial board and the part coordinator developed a draft of that charge to begin with, it has to be reviewed by the joint task group chair, and they have the opportunity to make edits to it. And once the joint task group chair, the part coordinator, and the JEB liaison agree upon what the draft is at that point, it has to go to the committee, or it has to go to the joint task group membership committee, so that those who are going to be actually doing the work can also agree upon what the charge is. So it's a cooperative engagement in that opportunity to try to get what's going to happen to that particular method and how it's going to end up being finalized. Next slide. So I have got, this page is basically just giving you sort of the upper end of individuals involved with making things happen at Standard Methods, the joint editorial board, the managing editor, and the Standard Methods manager. And that just kind of gives you an idea of what some of their responsibilities are. But for me, I think that the people who, and as David had said at the beginning in the keynote, it's the organization is the individuals who actually do the work. That that are the culture of the organization. That's the Standard Methods Committee, the Joint Task Group, and the part coordinators. That's really where things happen, and that's the value of what that group is, from my perspective, is they get it done. Next slide. Stakeholders now, I think, are uniquely important as well, whether they are part of the Standard Methods Committee or whether there's somebody who just uses standard methods and hits us with a question. And they, stakeholders, again, we have very broadly defined users, producers, and general interests, but they also include regulatory agencies. So we have people who we work with who are with either state or federal regulatory agencies. EPA, for instance, is one. Laboratory accreditation bodies, such as what Elap is. So we have a lot of input from these stakeholders that we think is extremely valuable in terms of how to improve our methods. Next. And so, again, either somebody on the Standard Methods Committee is a stakeholder and can hit us with questions, or somebody who's not on the Standard Methods Committee is still a stakeholder and can provide questions to us that helps inform us what we need to do and perhaps what we need to change. Next slide. And so this post-it note is just, I think that the idea that began in 1894 is still the rule today. We want to make the methods more efficient. We want to make them more uniform. We want to make them more useful. And we can't do that if we just sit here and decide how we want to produce the methods without the input of the stakeholders. So not just through the questions, but also through, if we could have the next slide, through their involvement as well. And a lot of times we have the need to clarify what we mean in the method. And a lot of times we'll get that because we get a question from a user who's just had an audit, and they're going, oh, well, our auditor said that this is what we needed to do, and we wanted to check with you. And so we sometimes feel like we get questions from people who are wanting us to contradict what the auditors have told them to do. And that's, I think, one of the things that we want to try to do is make sure that we are more clear about what our methods are trying to inform us how to conduct the method, rather than just throw something out there and ignore it after that. Next slide. And so I've got an example here where we had one user, if you will, a lab had contacted us, and they had a question about that was triggered from an audit. And the question was basically, well, on the total dissolved solids, we go ahead and just put it into the 180 furnace to go ahead and dry it, because it takes too much time to evaporate it to dryness before we put it in there. And so they were wondering, and they their audit found that as a deficiency. And so they had asked about, do we really need to do that? And if so, why? And I just decided, well, gosh, what does happen if you just put it in there? So this evaporating dish here is an example. Now, granted, it's got high TDS, but you can kind of see on the lower left side, you can see a big bubble that had formed, and then it's opened. And so it's like cracked open. And so it had formed and then burst towards the end of the drying, the evaporating or the drying. So I put this directly into the 180. Okay, so it had been boiling and popping the bubbles and probably throwing water with dissolved minerals in it out of the evaporating dish. And then you can actually see on the lower right, about 4 to 5 o'clock, you can see solids up on the sides that are above the water line. And so that is clear indication that you've had splattering occurring. And that's the rationale that we went back and basically explained to them and gave them the picture. This is the reason why you should evaporate it, so that you don't get the boiling happening in your sample, and then you're losing some of the sample inside the oven. So next slide. So we get, again, questions that come in are extremely valuable. And even if we find ourselves educating some of the lab analysts in terms of the methods, it still comes down to, we really need to figure out how to explain this stuff better in the method. And so I think that that's one of the things that, if we could go to the next slide, that the individuals who might participate on standard methods who come from the lab auditing community would be very beneficial, because they have a unique perspective on the methods. They're really trying to provide the opportunity for the labs to improve, to do better, to be well respected in terms of their client base. And so to have some lab auditors that are on standard methods is extremely valuable, I think, in terms of how we can make sure that we clarify, so that it's not, so that the same thing is understood by the person using the method as is understood by the person who's actually doing the auditing. I think that's important. One step that we need to try to accomplish. Next. So closing out, I think getting involved with standard methods is pretty easy. The first thing is you could just join the standard methods committee and then not really get involved too much right off the bat. Although we have some people who are not standard methods committee members who are interested in being on a joint task group, and that works too. And so what we do there is just Nathan takes it in hand, and he makes sure he gets them all the forms and gets them on the standard methods committee, and they're ready to go automatically right into a joint task group. So it's not difficult to join any level. Usually the PC and the JEB are going to be someone who's been, I guess maybe we're more willing to put in more time or something like that. But it certainly is a different level of time, of volunteer time at those. On the standard methods.org website, you can download all the information in terms of standard methods, how to, some information links there that I don't think you can probably click on in this presentation, but you can find out a little bit more about how things work, get the forms to actually join, and contact Nathan. Nathan's the guy. He does just about everything, and actually keeps us in check too. If we decide that we're going to do something that we shouldn't be doing, he makes sure he lets us know, which is always kind of good. And then the final slide, I believe. And so, but you can ask, Nathan questions, you can ask William questions or myself questions. And we are looking towards the 25th edition. And I've, coming maybe in 3 years, that's kind of our anticipated forecast at the moment. But that's, we do have the new methods that are being developed. Once they're approved, they show up online. And then, so the new 25th edition would be the hard copy book, is what that's referring to. So really online subscriptions are the way to get to the methods sooner than later. And we are kind of gradually migrating to what we call an online first model, where the book would be more of a capture of at a point in time of what the total methods are after we've had a number of them updated. And the online would be the most accessible for the most current up-to-date methods that Standard Methods publishes. So with that, I'll stop, and I don't think I gained as much time. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baxter, for your wonderful presentation. We do have a question. What is the typical turnaround time when asking standard method questions?
Well, sometimes it can be, I don't have an average time on that because I haven't tracked the time for that. It depends on where you ask it. Then there's a forum that you can ask a question, and that depends upon somebody to monitor that. And in the past, prior to Nathan, the standard methods manager he was the one who would always kind of check that, and that's sort of been the default for Nathan. But that those can actually take a fair amount of time. But the forum, I think, was also, we had kind of hoped that it would have allowed others who were on the forum to answer questions, not just someone from standard method. So, and that's never really kind of taken off in that regard. But we try to, we can probably get a turnaround time in, a week to maybe 3 weeks, I'd say would be a window for an average, depending. And again, I think part of it has to do with, some of our people who would be responding to those questions are working in labs, and they've got, major lab activities that are happening at certain times of the years. Either an audit's coming up or they've got reporting to get done, and that's always going to take a priority. And I know that when Nathan sends out an email to tell somebody from the forum, you can contact so-and-so, he always says, remember, these people are, the standard thing at the bottom is, remember, they're volunteers, and it may take a little time. But we are trying to get that. That's one of the things that we're kind of looking at, trying to how to improve that turnaround time. And there's a new feature that's coming on the standard methods. I think it's available now. So Ask the Experts, and Sophie has sort of taken the lead on that. And then she's going to pipe those questions to a couple of our part coordinators who are going to distill them down and they will be trying to get the answers from the individuals throughout standard methods who would best be able to answer those questions. So not a real good answer for having a detailed turnaround time, but it does depend upon who gets the question. Some of the part coordinators turn it around within days.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer, Dr. Baxter. And just a note for those who have recently joined us, we are aware that Microsoft is having some connection issues, and we do recommend disconnecting and rejoining if you lost video or audio. Again, we appreciate your time, and thank you so much for your persistence in joining us. So let's go back to our AO moment. We are back with another brief AO moment. Jen is quickly becoming today's voice of insights, and we are excited to bring her back for more. Jen has been popping in throughout the day with her quick takes that highlight what works and what we can take back to our own laboratories and teams. Take it away again, Jen.
All right, we'll just have a couple quick ones. I'll try and make up a few minutes here. Just really fast, make sure that when you get your certificates, you're taking the time to review them and everything that you expect to be there is there. You have 30 days after you get your certificate to let us know if there's anything that you think is wrong and submit an accreditation inquiry. So take the time to look over your list and make sure everything is as you expect. And on that note, also make sure that you read those non-compliance summaries. If you got denied for any single FOA, you'll get some information about what caused the problem. So make sure you take the time to read those so that you can get those problems fixed before you submit an amendment application. Okay, and I will send it back to Nak now for our next presentation.
Thank you again, Jen. So every lab, no matter how good, will encounter a problem. But how we respond to problems is what defines quality. That's where corrective action plans come in. Our next session focuses on what happens after an assessment and how laboratories can respond effectively to findings through corrective action plans. Please join me in welcoming Maria Friedman, who brings extensive experience in laboratory assessment quality systems and accreditation support to the Elap conference stage. Maria manages the assessment unit of the California Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program and is a member of the program's management team. She has more than 25 years of experience in multiple roles in the environmental laboratory industry and served for 11 years as quality manager for commercial laboratories in California. Today, Maria will walk us through what makes a CAP effective, not just complete. She'll walk us through the do's, don'ts, and real life lessons. If you're ever stared at a finding and wondered, now what? Well, this is the session for you. Let's welcome Maria to the stage.
Thank you, Nat. Welcome, everyone. So this session is titled A Feather in Your Cap, Effective Corrective Action. So I'm Maria Friedman, and today we'll discuss the importance of effective caps. So I want everyone to note, every finding is an opportunity, and every response is a chance to show that your lab doesn't just react. You improve. Strong corrective actions aren't just about fixing a mistake, they're how you earn that feather in your cap. Next slide, please. So let's make sure we're all speaking the same language. These acronyms will be used throughout OSA, OSAR, CAP, CAP1, CAP2, CCR, RCA, and TNI. Understanding this is essential to follow the rest of the presentation. Next slide, please. Here's what we'll cover. So the cap process, the price of poor caps, and the rewards of good ones. Why caps are not accepted, and I'll talk about what sets good caps apart. Then we'll take a moment to delve into some cap-related tips from last year's Elap Con, followed by some bonus material on root cause analysis. Next slide, please. So what is the cap process? So here's a step-by-step breakdown of the CAP process, starting with the on-site assessment. It's critical to understand there are only two opportunities to respond, CAP 1 and CAP 2. There is no CAP 3. Next slide, please. So the price of a poor cap. So poor caps come at a high cost, extended timelines, burdensome rework, delayed certificates, and even risk of suspension or denial. So you do not want that, right? Nobody wants that. Next slide, please. What about the rewards? So when a lab submits a strong cap, it does more than resolve a finding. So good caps help labs avoid delays in accreditation decisions, reduce the risk of denial, and demonstrate that the lab has a functioning, responsive quality system. They also make future assessments smoother because we see a track record of accountability. Ultimately, a well-written cap shows the lab takes compliance seriously and helps you to focus on continually improving your processes to make future OSAs as smooth as possible. Next slide, please. So these are examples of the most common pitfalls we see. Many caps are rejected because they don't follow the method or TNI standard. Remember, TNI has been implemented since January 1, 2024. And we're coming up 2026, so it's going to be more than 2 years. So other examples are those responses that are vague or incomplete, saying what will be done without explaining how or when. And sometimes labs submit a quality manual or SOP that was supposed to have been updated, but it's the same version that we saw during the assessment. So that means nothing has been done, nothing has been started. So details matter, evidence matters. Next slide, please. So continuing on more reasons why caps are not accepted, some responses don't actually address the finding. They're disorganized. We can't tell which response goes with which finding. And sometimes findings are overlooked and there's no response submitted for it at all. So please make sure that you review every single finding and have a response for it. Next slide, please. And perhaps the most concerning, caps that show no urgency. If your response says, we'll fix it next year, that signals the lab hasn't grasped the risk or priority of the problem. A good cap treats compliance like it matters, because it does. Set realistic but prompt deadlines. And it is expected that simple corrections are implemented even before you submit your CAP 1 to ELAP. Next slide, please. So now what does good look like? A good CAP. So a solid CAP includes root cause analysis, updated procedures, staff training, clear timelines, and designated responsibility. Oh, and when you submit your CAP documentation to ELAB, please do not send links to documents or only send attachments. So it is necessary that you can send multiple emails to accommodate all the attachment you want to submit with your CAP, because we're not allowed to click any links. Otherwise, it will be returned to you. Next slide, please. So now we're going to recap from the last year's Elap Con. This slide here is because we noticed a pattern last year and we want to make sure it's not repeated. Some labs try to resolve findings on the spot during their assessment, which is great. Quick action is always good. But here's the key point. Correcting the problem during the assessment doesn't eliminate the need for a formal corrective action plan. And why is that? Because the CAP isn't just about fixing the immediate issue. It's about showing that you've addressed the root cause so it doesn't happen again. Second, if you say in your CAP that something will be completed by a certain date, please make sure it happens. If it's not done, it weakens the credibility of your response and your quality systems as a whole. And you may get a repeat finding in the next OSA cycle, which should be a no-no. And third, if your responses require a CAP 2 and your CAP 2 doesn't fully resolve the finding, it goes up the chain. ELAP management will make a final determination about accreditation. That could mean denying specific FOAs, revoking the lab certificate, issuing an interim, or even referring the case to enforcement. There is no CAP 3, I repeat. And I should also point out that when you submit an OSAR, your report from your TPA with your application, we look at those carefully. ELAB does not rubber stamp. We want to be sure that requirements are being met and compliance issues are raised with consistency and equality, no matter who performed the assessment. Next slide, please. So the California Code of Regulations 64802.20 G2 and TNI Volume 1 Module 2 4.11.2 requires root cause analysis as part of the CAP process. So root cause analysis isn't a formality. It helps prevent recurrence. And of course, required, as said. Next slide. So bonus materials. So, yeah, hey, here. I put in here 2 useful RCA tools, the 5 whys and the fishbone diagram. Each has its strengths. 5 whys is straightforward and effective for simple problems. Fishbone is better for complexity. So we're going to dive into this a little bit. Next slide, please. So here's the 5 why examples. I'm going to give you a few minutes to digest. It's about a missed refrigerator temperature reading, okay? So that missed temperature reading turns out to be a deeper issue of undefined roles and contingency planning. And as you can see, root cause analysis exposes these systemic gaps. And this is a simple one for 5y. This one is the fishbone diagram. It helps visualize contributing factors across categories like people, methods, equipment, and environment. It's a strong choice for team-based brainstorming. So if you do your CAP 1 right, complete your OSAR, then you would have time for a fishbone. Next slide, please. I just put a blow-up example of that fishbone diagram. A closer look at the same diagram showing how a multitude of factors may contribute toward a single question. In this example, why are MDL studies late? As you add the bones of your fish, you are identifying the areas that contribute to a problem. Some are trivial, some are hard to understand, and some require intensive investigation to see what impact they really have. But to get to the root of a complex problem, it helps to get a picture of what might be causing it. So you can start looking at the details and making decisions about what you can do that will really make a difference towards solving the problem. Next slide, please. So here's what I want to leave with you. Every corrective action plan is more than a checkbox. It's a chance to strengthen your lab, your team, and the trust others place in your data. A good CAP reflects a lab that learns from its mistakes, owns its processes, and is committed to getting it right. And when you do that, when your CAP is clear, complete, and corrected, you're not just complying with a requirement, you're earning something. You're earning confidence, credibility, and yes, a feather in your cap. So who knew compliance could look this good on you? So wear that feather proudly. It means you didn't just fix a problem. You prove your lab takes quality seriously and you do the work to back it up. Thank you for your time. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer or you can send email.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Maria. So up next, here is one last accreditation officer moment for today. Jen is back with a final insight before we wrap up day one of Elap Con. Let's hear what she's got for us this time. Jen, back to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to all our presenters. I'm sure that Knock will end the day with that, but I wanted to just take a second. So much good information in all of the presentations today. Just a couple quick thoughts to end my time with you this morning. Just make sure you're reading your on-site assessment reports before you submit them with your application. It's just some instances where the findings and the corrective actions don't add up and match properly, and so it gets really confusing for those technical staff reviewing reports if things don't look like they make sense. So make sure you take a minute to read them before you send them to us. Make sure they make sense to you, because if they don't even make sense to you and you were there, we don't have a lot of hope here on our side to figure out what happened. And then also be a matching expert. I know that Kate's team, the administrative members mentioned this, but make sure everything matches. Your FOA tables match your PT results, match the methods that are listed in your on-site assessment. If you can match, things will be so much easier for you and for us, and then everyone is happy. And then one last thought is, please feel free to send me an email anytime you have any questions. I'm happy to answer what I know, and at least if I don't know the answer, I know who to ask, so I can get you answers as needed. So please feel free to reach out. Don't feel like you are bothering me. That is quite literally my job. So I'm happy to help out however I can. Thanks so much for joining me this morning, and I will give it back to Knock.
What a packed and productive morning. Thank you all for staying engaged and bringing your curiosity and commitment to the table. Again, as Jen said, we'd like to extend a thank you again to all of our speakers for contributing to day one. So here's a quick recap on what we've covered today. We started with a powerful keynote on discipline and purpose. We tackled the nitty-gritty of accreditation administration, assessments, and corrective actions. And we learned a lot from Jennifer's AO moments, short but mighty reminders of how to stay sharp and compliant. So for tomorrow, day 2, we're going to shift focus from foundational practices to technical excellence with sessions on the method update rule, effective assessments, control charts, and more. If today was about building muscle, tomorrow is about fine-tuning performance. So rest up, review your notes, and be ready to dig even deeper. On behalf of Elap and all our presenters, thank you again. And we'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for day 2 of boot camp.